President. Got a couple of minutes still before we...
Trade notes. Now, Mr. President, Senator, you all, I'm sure, are aware of this. Let me remind you, when we, at 9 o'clock straight up, we go on the air, but there's a minute and 15 seconds before I actually say good evening for the networks to put us on the air and all that sort of business. So we're going to get two hard cues, and then we'll know we're on the air when I say good evening, when we're actually doing the thing, okay? But they may be getting shots and stuff before that. We're not going to leave, are we?
No. I was afraid we'd give our openings and we wouldn't be able to do it again.
The audio works, by the way. That's good.
Good.
Yeah, everything checks out. Pictures are coming out all right. Everything's fine. All right, 1 minute. 1 minute to silence. Not the all, not you, them.
Rising incomes, in America, strong peace.
30 seconds, we're on. Good evening from the Bushnell Theater in Hartford, Connecticut. I'm Jim Lara of the NewsHour on PBS. Welcome to the first of the 1996 presidential debates between President Bill Clinton, the Democratic nominee, and Senator Bob Dole, the Republican nominee. This event is sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates. It will last 90 minutes following a format and rules worked out by the two campaigns. There will be 2-minute opening and closing statements. In between, a series of questions. each having 3 parts: a 90-second answer, a 60-second rebuttal, and a 30-second response. I will assist the candidates in adhering to those time limits with the help of a series of lights visible to both. Under their rules, the candidates are not allowed to question each other directly. I will ask the questions. There are no limitations on the subjects. The order for everything tonight was determined by coin toss. Now, to the opening statements and to President Clinton. Mr. President.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you to the people of Hartford, our hosts. I want to begin by saying again how much I respect Senator Dole and his record of public service, and how hard I will try to make this campaign and this debate one of ideas, not insults. 4 years ago, I ran for president at a time of high unemployment and rising frustration. I wanted to turn this country around with a program of opportunity for all, responsibility from all, and an American community where everybody has a role to play. I wanted a government that was smaller and less bureaucratic, to help people have the tools to make the most of their own lives. 4 years ago, you took me on faith. Now, there's a record. 10.5 million more jobs, rising incomes, falling crime rates and welfare rolls, a strong America at peace. We are better off than we were 4 years ago. Let's keep it going. We cut the deficit by 60%. Now let's balance the budget and protect Medicare, Medicaid, education, and the environment. We cut taxes for 15 million working Americans. Now let's pass the tax cuts for education and child rearing, help with medical emergencies and buying a home. We passed family and medical leave. Now let's expand it so more people can succeed as parents and in the workforce. We passed 100,000 police, the assault weapons ban, the Brady Bill. Now let's keep going by finishing the work of putting the police on the street and tackling juvenile gangs. We passed welfare reform. Now let's move 1 million people from welfare to work. And most important, let's make education our highest priority so that every 8-year-old will be able to read, every 12-year-old can log on to the internet, every 18-year-old can go to college. We can build that bridge to the 21st century, and I look forward to discussing exactly how we're going to do it.
Senator Dole, 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President, for those kind words. Thank the people of Hartford, the Commission, and all those out here who may be listening or watching. It's a great honor for me to be here, standing here as the Republican nominee. I'm very proud to be the Republican nominee, reaching out to Democrats and independents. I have 3 very special people with me, my wife Elizabeth, my daughter Robin, who've never let me down, and a fellow named Frank Carafa, who, from New York, along with Ollie Mannanen, helped me out in the mountains of Italy a few years back. I've learned from them that people do have tough times, and sometimes you can't go it alone. And that's what America's all about. I remember getting my future back from doctors and nurses and a doctor in Chicago named Dr. Kalikian. And ever since that time, I've tried to give something back to my country, to the people who are watching us tonight. America is the greatest place on the face of the earth. Now, I know millions of you still have anxieties. You work harder and harder to make ends meet and put food on the table. You worry about the quality and the safety of your children, the quality of education. But even more importantly, you worry about the future. And will they have the same opportunities that you and I have had? And Jack Kemp and I want to share with you some ideas tonight. Jack Kemp is my running mate, doing an outstanding job. Now, I'm a plain-speaking man, and I learned long ago that your word was your bond. And I promise you tonight that I'll try to address your concerns and not try to exploit them. It's a tall order, but I've been running against the odds for a long time. And again, I'm honored to be here this evening.
Mr. President, first question. There's a major difference in your view of the role of the federal government and that of Senator Dole. How would you define the difference?
Well, Jim, I believe that the federal government should give people the tools and try to establish the conditions in which they can make the most of their own lives. That, to me, is the key. And that leads me to some different conclusions from Senator Dole. For example, we have reduced the size of the federal government to its smallest size in 30 years. We've reduced more regulations, eliminated more programs than my two Republican predecessors. But I have worked hard for things like the family and medical leave law, the Brady bill, the assault weapons ban, the program to put 100,000 police on the street. All these are programs that Senator Dole opposed that I supported because I felt they were a legitimate effort to help people make the most of their own lives. I've worked hard to help families impart values to their own children. I supported the V-chip so that parents would be able to control what their kids watch on television when they're young, along with the rating systems for television and educational television. I supported strong action against the tobacco companies to stop the marketing, advertising, and sale of tobacco to young people. I supported a big increase in the Safe and Drug-Free Schools program. These were areas on which Senator Dole and I differed, but I believed that they were the right areas for America to be acting together as one country to help individuals and families make the most of their own lives and raise their kids with good values and a good future.
Senator Dole, 1 minute.
I think the basic difference is, and I've had some experience in this, I think the basic difference, I trust the people. The President trusts the government. We go back and look at the health care plan that he wanted to impose on the American people. 1/7 the total economy, 17 new taxes, price controls, 35 to 50 new bureaucracies, it cost $1.5 trillion. Don't forget that happened in 1993. A tax increase that taxed everybody in America, not just the rich. If you made $25,000 as the original proposal, you got your Social Security taxes increased. We had a BTU tax turned into a $35 billion gas tax, a $265 billion tax increase. I guess I rely more on the individual. I carry a little card around in my pocket called the 10th Amendment. Where possible, I want to give power back to the states and back to the people. That's my difference with the President. We'll have specific differences later. He noted a few, but there are others.
Mr. President, 30 seconds.
I trust the people. We've done a lot to give the people more powers to make their own decisions over their own lives. But I do think we are right when we try to, for example, give mothers and newborns 48 hours before they can be kicked out of the hospital, ending these drive-by deliveries. I think we were right to pass the Kassebaum-Kennedy bill, which says you can't lose your health insurance just because you change jobs or because someone in your family's been sick. Our government is smaller and less bureaucratic and has given more authority to the states than its two predecessors under Republican presidents, but I do believe we have to help our people get ready to succeed in the 21st century.
Senator Dole, the President said in his opening statement, we are better off today than we were 4 years ago. Do you agree?
Well, he's better off than he was 4 years ago.
I agree with that. That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I may be better off 4 years from now. But I don't know. I look at the slowest growth in a century. He inherited a growth of 4.7, 4.8%. Now it's down to about 2.4%. We're going to pass 1 million bankruptcies this year for the first time in history. We've got stagnant wages. In fact, women's wages have dropped 2.2%. Men's wages haven't gone up, gone down. So we have stagnation. We have the highest foreign debt in history. And it seems to me that if you take a look, are you better off? Well, I guess some may be better off. Saddam Hussein is probably better off than he was 4 years ago. Rene Preval is probably better off than he was 4 years ago. But are the American people? They're working harder and higher and harder and paying more taxes. For the first time in history, you pay about 40% of what you earn, more than you spend for food, clothing, and shelter combined, for taxes under this administration. So some may be better off. They talk about family income being up. That's not true in Connecticut. Family income is down. And it's up in some cases because both parents are working. One works for the family, and one works to pay taxes for the government. We're going to give them a tax cut so they can spend more time with their children, maybe even take a vacation. That's what America is all about.
Mr. President, 1 minute.
Well, let me say, first of all, in February, Senator Dole acknowledged that the American economy was in the best shape it's been in 30 years. We have 10.5 million more jobs, a faster job growth rate than under any Republican administration since the 1920s. Wages are going up for the first time in a decade. We have record numbers of new small businesses. We had the biggest drop in the number of people in poverty in 27 years. All groups of people are growing. We had the biggest drop in income inequality in 27 years in 1995. The average family's income has gone up over $1,600 just since our economic plan passed. So I think it's clear that we're better off than we were 4 years ago. Now we need to focus on what do we need to do to be better off still. How can we help people as we are to get their retirements when they work for small businesses, to be able to afford health insurance, to be able to educate their children. That's what I want to focus on. But we're clearly better off than we were 4 years ago, as Senator Dole acknowledged this year.
Senator Dole?
I doubt that I acknowledge that this year, but in any event, I think we just look at the facts. We asked the people who are viewing tonight, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? It's not whether we're better off, it's whether they're better off. Are you working harder to put food on the table, feed your children? Are your children getting better education? Drug use has doubled the past 44 months all across America. Crime has gone down, but it's because of mayors like Rudy Giuliani, where one-third of the drop happened in one city, New York City. So yes, some may be better off. But of the people listening tonight, the working families who will benefit from our economic package, they'll be better off when Bob Dole is president and Jack Kemp is vice president.
Mr. President, Senator Dole has come pretty close in the last few days accusing you of lying about his position on Medicare reform. Have you done so?
Absolutely not. Let's look at the position. First of all, remember that in this campaign season, since Senator Dole's been a candidate, he has bragged about the fact that he voted against Medicare in the beginning in 1965, one of only 12 members. He said he did the right thing then. He knew it wouldn't work at the time. That's what he said. Then his budget that he passed along with Speaker Gingrich cut Medicare $270 billion, more than was necessary to repair the Medicare Trust Fund. It would have charged seniors more for out-of-pocket costs as well as more in premiums because doctors could have charged them more. The American Medical Hospital Association, the Nurses Association, the Catholic Hospital Association all said hundreds of hospitals could close and people would be hurt badly under the Dole-Gingrich Medicare plan that I vetoed. And now with this risky $550 billion tax scheme of Senator Dole's, even his own friends, his campaign co-chair, Senator D'Amato, says that they can't possibly pay for it without cutting Medicare more and cutting Social Security as well, according to him. Now, my balanced budget plan adds 10 years to the life of the Medicare Trust Fund, 10 years. And we'll have time to deal with the long-term problems of the baby boomers. But it was simply wrong to finance their last scheme to cut Medicare $270 billion to run the risk of it withering on the vine. We always have to reform it over the years, but we need someone who believes in it to reform it.
Senator Dole?
Well, I must say, I look back at the vote on Medicare in 1965. We had a program called Elder Care that also provided drugs and was means tested, so people who needed medical attention received it. I thought it was a good program. But I've supported Medicare ever since. In fact, I used to go home, my mother would tell me, said, Bob, all I've got is my Social Security and my Medicare. Don't cut it. I wouldn't violate anything my mother said. In fact, we had a conversation about our mothers one day, a very poignant conversation in the White House. I'm concerned about health care. I've had the best health care in government hospitals, Army hospitals, and I know its importance, but we've got to fix it. It's his trustees, the president's trustees, not mine, who say it's going to go broke. He doesn't fix it for 10 years. We ought to appoint a commission just as we did with Social Security in 1983 when we rescued Social Security, and I was proud to be on that commission, along with Claude Pepper, the champion of senior citizens from Florida. And we can do it again if we take politics out of it. Stop scaring the seniors, Mr. President. You've already spent $45 million scaring seniors and tearing me apart. I think it's time to have a truce.
Well, let me say, first of all, I'd be happy to have a commission deal with this, and I appreciate what Senator Dole did on the '83 Social Security Commission. But it won't be possible to do if his tax scheme passes, because even his own campaign co-chair, Senator D'Amato, says he'll have to cut Medicare even more than was cut in the bill that I vetoed. I vetoed that bill because it cut more Medicare and basically ran the risk of breaking up the system. My balanced budget plan puts 10 years on the Medicare. We ought to do that. Then we can have a commission. But Senator Dole's plans are not good for the country.
Senator Dole, speaking of your tax plan, do you still think that's a good idea, the 15% across-the-board tax cut?
Oh, yes, and you'll be eligible. And so will the,
Me too?
So will the former president. Yes.
That's good. I need it.
Well, the people need it. That's the point. This is not a Wall Street tax cut. This is a family tax cut. This is a Main Street tax cut. 15% across. Let's take a family making $30,000 a year. That's $1,261. Now, maybe some in this Bushnell Memorial, it's not a lot of money, but people watching tonight with a couple of kids, a working family, that's 4 or 5 months of daycare, maybe a personal computer. It may be 3 or 4 months of mortgage payments. This economic package is about families, but it's a 6-point package. First of all, it's a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, which President Clinton defeated. He twisted arms and got 6 Democrats to vote the other way. We lost by 1 vote. It's balancing the budget by the year 2002. It's a tax cut, cutting capital gains 50%. So you can go out and create more jobs and more opportunities. It's a state tax relief. It's a $500 per child tax credit. It's about litigation reform. Now the president gets millions of dollars from the trial lawyers if I didn't like this provision. In fact, when I fell off that podium in Chico, before I hit the ground, I had a call on my cell phone from a trial lawyer saying, I think we got a case here. So, and it's also regulatory reform. So it's a good package, Mr. President. We'd like to have your support.
Mr. President?
Well, here's the problem with it. It sounds very good, but there's a reason that 500 economists, including 7 Nobel Prize winners, and business periodicals like Business Week, and even Senator Dole's friend, Senator Warren Rudman, former Republican senator from New Hampshire, says it is not a practical program. It's a $550 billion tax scheme that will cause a big hole in the deficit, which will raise interest rates and slow down the economy and cause people to pay more for home mortgages, car payments, credit card payments, college loans, and small business loans. It's not good to raise the deficit. We worked too hard to lower it. It'll actually raise taxes on 9 million people, and in addition to that, it will force bigger cuts in Medicare, Medicaid, education, and the environment than the ones that he and Mr. Gingrich passed that I vetoed last year. So it sounds great, but our targeted tax cut for education, child rearing, health care, and home buying, which is paid for in my balanced budget plan, something that he has not done, certified by the Congressional Budget Office, that's the right way to go.
Senator Dole?
The President wants to increase spending 20% over the next 6 years. I want to increase spending 14%. That's how simple it is. I want the government to pinch pennies for a change instead of the American families. We're talking about 6 percentage points over 6 years. And with that money, you give it back to the working people. You also provide opportunity scholarships so low-income parents will have the same choice that others have in sending their children to better schools. And it will work. And when it does work, Mr. President, I know you'll congratulate me.
Mr. President, the Senator mentioned trial lawyers and campaign. That means campaign financing. How do you personally avoid being unduly influenced by people who give you money or give you services in your campaigns?
Well, I try to articulate my positions as clearly as possible, tell people what I stand for, and let them decide whether they're going to support me or not. The Senator mentioned the trial lawyers. In the case of the product liability bill, which they passed and I vetoed, I think that's what he's talking about. I actually wanted to sign that bill, and I told the people exactly the Congress, exactly what kind of bill I would sign. Now, a lot of the trial lawyers didn't want me to sign any bill at all, but I thought we ought to do what we could to cut frivolous lawsuits. But they wouldn't make some of the changes that I thought should be made. Now, let me just give you an example. I had a person in the Oval Office who lost a child in a school bus accident where a drunk driver caused the accident directly, but there were problems with the school bus. The drunk driver had no money. Under the new bill, if I had signed it, a person like that could never have had any recovery. I thought that was wrong. So I gave 4 or 5 specific examples to the Congress, and I said, prove to me that these people could recover, but we're going to eliminate frivolous lawsuits. I'll sign the bill. But generally, I believe that a president has to be willing to do what he thinks is right. I've done a lot of things that were controversial, my economic plan, my trade position, Bosnia, Haiti, taking on the NRA for the first time, taking on the tobacco companies for the first time. Sometimes you just have to do that because you know it's right for the country over the long run. That's what I've tried to do, and that's what I will continue to do as president.
Senator Dole?
I mean, how does he avoid conflict? Well, I don't know in the case of the trial lawyers. When I look at the trial lawyers, I mean, you're a few million short. You run out to Hollywood and pick up 2 to 4 million. And organized labor comes to Washington, D.C. and puts 35 million into the pot. Now, if these aren't special interests, then I've got a lot to learn. I was there for a while before I left on June the 11th. The trial lawyers, I don't, you know, my wife's a lawyer. We're the only 2 lawyers in Washington trust each other. But we're lawyers. I like lawyers. I don't dislike trial lawyers. But it seems to me there's got to be some end to the frivolous lawsuits, and there's got to be some cap on punitive damage. You're putting a lot of business people out of business, small businessmen and small business women who paid 70% of your $265 billion tax increase, the largest tax increase in the history of America. I said that one day, and Pat Moynihan, a Democrat, said no. He said in the history of the world. So I modified it, the largest tax increase in the history of the world. And it seems to me that there's a problem there, Mr. President. And I will address you as Mr. President. You didn't do that with President Bush in 1992.
Mr. President.
Let me say, first of all, I signed a tort reform bill that dealt with civilian aviation a couple of years ago. I proved that I will sign reasonable tort reform. Secondly, Senator Dole had some pretty harsh comments about special interest money. But it wasn't me who opposed what we tried to do to save the lives of children who are subject to tobacco, and then went to the tobacco growers and bragged about standing up for the federal government when we tried to stop the advertising, marketing, and sales of tobacco to children. And it wasn't me that let the polluters actually come into the halls of Congress, into the rooms, and rewrite the environmental laws. That's what Speaker Gingrich and Senator Dole did, not me.
That's not true.
So I believe that we should take a different approach to this and talk about how we stand on the issues instead of trying to characterize each other's motivations. I think Senator Dole and I just honestly disagree.
Well, Senator Dole, let me ask you the same question I asked the President. How do you avoid being influenced by people who contribute money and services to your campaigns?
I think it's very difficult. Let's be honest about it. That's why we need campaign finance reform. That's why I reach out to the parole voters, and we've done about all that. We are the Reform Party, the Republican Party, and the parole voters are looking for a home. Ought to take a look at the Republican record. Whatever it is, whatever the checklist was in '92, it's all done but campaign finance reform. I worked with Senator Mitchell, who played me, I guess, in the debate warm-up. We tried 6 or 8 years ago. He appointed 3 people. I appointed 3 people to get campaign finance reform. We couldn't get it done because it wasn't enforceable. You suggested a commission. Newt Gingrich did. I've suggested that at least 4 or 5 years ago. We have a commission on campaign finance reform. They sent it to Congress, and we have to vote it up or down. That's how it works. We're never going to fix it by the parties because Democrats want a better advantage themselves. We want a better advantage as Republicans, and that's not how it's going to work. But I want to touch on this tobacco thing. I know the President's been puffing a lot on that. But I want to go back to 1965. That was my first vote against tobacco companies when I said we ought to label cigarettes, and I've had a consistent record ever since 1965. We passed a bill in 1992 that encouraged the states to adopt programs to stop kids from smoking. All 50 states did it. It took 3.5 years. It wasn't until election year, Mr. President, you ever thought about stopping smoking. What about drugs that have increased double in the last 44 months? Cocaine's up 141%, or marijuana, cocaine up 166%. I mean, it seems to me that you have a selective memory, and you know, mine doesn't work that way, so I just want to try to correct it as we go along.
Mr. Lara, I hope we'll have a chance to discuss drugs later in the program, but let me respond to what you said. I agree that too many incumbent politicians in Washington and both parties have consistently opposed campaign finance reform. That was certainly the case from the minute I got there. So after Speaker Gingrich and Senator Dole took over the Congress, I went to New Hampshire, and a man suggested, a gentleman that unfortunately just passed away a couple of days ago, suggested that we appoint a commission, and I shook hands with him on it, and I appointed my members, and the commission never met. And then Senator Dole's ardent supporter, Senator McCain, who's out there today, along with Senator Feingold, sponsored a campaign finance reform proposal. I strongly supported it, and members of Senator Dole's own party in the Senate killed it, and he was not out there urging them to vote for the McCain-Feingold bill. So I think the American people, including the Perot supporters, know that I've had a consistent record in favor of campaign finance reform, and I will continue to have. and I hope we can finally get it in the next session of Congress, because we need it badly.
Senator Dole, 30 seconds.
Well, on campaign reform itself, we're going to get it when we have a bipartisan commission. Take it out of politics, get people who don't have any interest in politics but understand the issue, and let them make a recommendation to Congress. No, we're not kidding anybody, Mr. President. These are sophisticated people watching that, millions and millions of Americans. They know the Republican Party hasn't done it. They know the Democratic Party won't do it. We ought to agree that somebody else should do it, and we have to vote it up or down.
Mr. President, the senator mentioned drugs. He's suggested in the past that you bear some responsibility for the rise in drug use of teenagers in the United States. Is he right?
Well, Jim, I think every American in any position of responsibility should be concerned about what's happened. I am. But let's look at the overall record. Overall in America, cocaine use has dropped 30% in the last 4 years, casual drug use down 13%. The tragedy is that our young people are still increasing their use of drugs, up to about 11% total with marijuana, and I regret it. Let me tell you what I tried to do about it. I appointed a 4-star general who led our efforts south of the border to keep drugs from coming into the country as our nation's drug czar, the most heavily decorated soldier in uniform when he retired. We submitted the biggest drug budget ever. We have dramatically increased control and enforcement at the border. We supported a crime bill that had 60 death penalties, including the death penalty for drug kingpins. And I supported a big expansion in the Safe and Drug-Free Schools program to support things like the DARE program, because I thought all those things were very important. Do I think that I bear some responsibility for the fact that too many of our children still don't understand drugs are wrong, drugs can kill you? Even though I have consistently opposed the legalization of drugs all my public life and worked hard against them, I think we all do, and I hope we can do better. I don't think this issue should be politicized, because my record is clear, and I don't think Senator Dole supports youth using drugs. I think we just have to continue to work on this until those who think it isn't dangerous and won't kill them and won't destroy their lives get the message and change.
Senator?
Well, again, you're very selective, Mr. President. You don't want to politicize drugs, but it's hard to politicize Medicare and go out and scare senior citizens and other vulnerable groups, veterans and people who get Pell Grants and things of this. I mean, you say we've done all these bad things, which isn't the case. But it seems to me the record is clear. The record is pretty clear in Arkansas. When your governor, drug use doubled. You resisted the appointment of a drug czar there because you thought it might interfere with treatment. But here you cut the drug czar's office 83%. You cut interdiction substantially. I mean, that's what I want to stop it from coming across the border. And in my administration, we're going to train the National Guard to stop it from coming across the border. This is an invasion of drugs from all over the world, and we have a responsibility. You had a surgeon, or before General McCaffrey, you had a lady who said we ought to consider legalizing drugs. Is that the kind of leadership we need? And I won't comment on other things that have happened in your administration or your past about drugs. But it seems to me the kids ought to, if they started, they ought to stop and just don't do it.
Mr. President?
Let me say again, we did have a drug czar in Arkansas, but he answered to the governor, just like this one answers to the president. That's what I thought we ought to do. Secondly, Senator Dole, you voted against the crime bill that had the death penalty for drug kingpins in it, and you voted to cut services to 23 million school children under the Safe and Drug-Free Schools Act. I don't think that means you're soft on drugs. We just have a different approach. But let me remind you that my family has suffered from drug abuse. I know what it's like to see somebody you love nearly lose their lives, and I hate drugs, Senator. We need to do this together, and we can.
Senator Dole, on the government, continuing to talk about the government's role, if elected president, would you seek to repeal the Brady bill and the ban on assault weapons?
Not if I didn't have a better idea, but I've got a better idea. It's something I've worked on for 15 years. It's called the automated check or the instant check. It's being used in 17 states right now, states like Florida, Colorado, Virginia, and other states. You don't buy any gun. You don't get any gun. We've got 20 million names on a computer in Washington, D.C. of people who should not have guns. We ought to keep guns out of the hands of criminals, and there are 8 other categories that should not have guns. I've been working on this for a long, long time. You walk in, You put your little card in there. If it says tilt, you don't get any gun. You don't get a handgun. You don't get a rifle. You don't get a shotgun. You get Zippo. If we're going to protect America's children and American families and people who live as prisoners in their own home, we've got to stop guns from being dumped on the street. The administration says they support the instant check. They've appropriated about $200 million, but only spent about $3 million to get it underway. In our administration, in my administration, we will expedite. This keeps up with technology. It keeps guns out of the hands of people who should not have guns. That is the bottom line. And I believe it's a good idea, has strong bipartisan support, and perhaps that's another thing we can depoliticize. You talk about the Brady bill. There's only been one prosecution under the Brady bill, only one under the assault weapon ban, and only 7 under the Brady bill that you talk about all the time. And on the assault weapon bans, out of 17 weapons that were banned, only 6 banned now because 11 have been modified and they're back on the street. Let's get together on this instant check, because that will really make a difference.
Mr. President.
Let me say, first of all, Senator Dole has gone back and forth about whether he'd be for repealing the Brady bill or repealing the assault weapons ban, and I think his present position is that he would not do so, and if that's true, I'm grateful for it. But let's look at the facts here. The Brady bill has kept at least 60,000 felons, fugitives, and stalkers from getting handguns. Senator Dole led the fight against the Brady bill. He tried to keep it from coming to my desk. He didn't succeed, and I signed it, and I'm glad I did. Then when we had the assault weapons ban in the Senate, Senator Dole fought it bitterly and opposed the entire crime bill and almost brought the entire crime bill down because the National Rifle Association didn't want the assault weapons ban, just like they didn't want the Brady bill. But 2 years later, nobody's lost their handguns, their rifles. We've expanded the Brady bill to cover people who beat up their spouses and their kids, and this is a safer country. So I'm glad I took on that fight, and I believe, with all respect, I was right and he was wrong.
Well, the President doesn't have it quite right. I mean, it seemed to me that the time that the assault weapon ban was not effective. That's history. As I've told the NRA, that's history. You're not going to worry about it anymore. I'm not going to worry about it anymore. Let's do something better. Let's stop, playing the political game, Mr. President, talking about this and this. You add up all the states that have used the instant check and how many weapons they've kept out of the hands of criminals, it would far surpass the number you mentioned. So in my view, if you want to be protected, you ought to vote for Bob Dole, and we'll get the instant check passed, and we'll keep guns out of the hands of criminals.
Mr. President, Senator Dole said the other day that you practiced a photo-op foreign policy that has lessened the credibility of the United States throughout the world. Is he wrong about that?
If that's what he said, he's not right about that. Look at where we are today. The United States is still the indispensable nation in the aftermath of the Cold War and on the brink of the 21st century. I have worked to support our country as the world's strongest force for peace and freedom, prosperity and security. We have done the following things. Number one, we've managed the aftermath of the Cold War, supporting a big drop in nuclear weapons in Russia, the removal of Russian troops from the Baltics, the integration of Central and Eastern European democracies into a new partnership with NATO, and I might add, with a democratic Russia. There are no nuclear missiles pointed at the children of the United States tonight and have not been in our administration for the first time since the dawn of the nuclear age. We have worked hard for peace and freedom. When I took office, Haiti was governed by a dictator that had defied the United States. When I took office, the worst war in Europe was waging in Bosnia. Now there's a democratically elected president in Haiti, peace in Bosnia. We've just had elections there. We made progress in Northern Ireland and the Middle East. We've also stood up to the new threats of terrorism, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, organized crime, and we have worked hard to expand America's economic presence around the world with the biggest increase in trade, with the largest number of new trade agreements in history. That's one of the reasons America's #1 in auto production again.
Senator?
Well, I have a different view. Again, I've supported the President on Bosnia, and I think we were told the troops would be out in a year. Now I understand it's been extended till sometime next year. But let's start with Somalia. where they dragged Americans through the streets and where 18 Americans were killed one day because they were pinned down for 8 hours, the Rangers. They didn't have the weapons. They didn't have the tanks. They asked for the tanks. They didn't get the tanks from this administration because we were nation building. It's called mission creep. We turn it over to the United Nations. The president didn't have much to do about it. Look at Haiti, where we spent about $3 billion. We got an alarm call there about 2 weeks ago. You got to send down some more people because the president's found out there are death squads in his own property. So we need more protection from America. Bosnia, Northern Ireland, there's no ceasefire in Bosnia. I think there's still lots of problems in Bosnia. We agreed to train and arm the Muslims so they could defend themselves. The policy you had when you ran in 1992, we haven't done that. We're way behind, which means Americans can't come home. Americans shouldn't have gone there in the first place had we let them defend themselves as they have a right to do under Article 57 of the United Nations Charter.
Mr. President.
First of all, I take full responsibility for what happened in Somalia, but the American people must remember that those soldiers were under an American commander when that happened. I believe they did the best they could under the circumstances, and let's not forget that hundreds of thousands of lives were saved there. Secondly, in Haiti, political violence is much, much smaller than it was. Thirdly, in Bosnia, it's a virtual miracle that there has been no return to war, and at least there has now been an election, and the institutions are beginning to function. In Northern Ireland and the Middle East, we are better off than we were 4 years ago. There will always be problems in this whole world, but if we're moving in the right direction and America is leading, we're better off.
Senator Dole, if elected president, what criteria would you use to decide when to send U.S. troops into harm's way?
Well, after World War I, we had a policy of disengagement. Then from World War I to World War II, we had sort of a compulsory engagement policy. Now I think we have to have a selective engagement policy. We have to determine when our interests are involved, not the United Nations interests. And many of the things the President talked about, he turned over to the United Nations. They decided. He's deployed more troops than any president in history around the world. It's cost us billions and billions of dollars for peacekeeping operations. These are facts. And it seems to me that when you make a decision, the decision is made by the President of the United States, by the Commander-in-Chief. He makes that decision when he commits young men or young women who are going to go around and defend our liberty and our freedom. That would be my position. Then I'm going to have a top-down review at the Pentagon, not a bottom-up review. We all fight over how much money is there. I want a top-down review to determine what our priorities are and what we should do in defense, and then follow that policy instead of this bottom-up review with all the services fighting for the money. The President said he was going to cut defense $60 billion. He cut defense $112 billion, devastated states like California and others. And I think now we've got a problem. We've got to go back and look. It's just like you said in Texas one day, you raised taxes too much, and you did, and you cut defense too much, Mr. President, and you did, and you may have said that too. But the bottom line is we are the strongest nation in the world. We provide the leadership, and we're going to have to continue to provide the leadership. But let's do it on our terms, when our interests are involved, and not when somebody blows a whistle at the United Nations.
Our military is the strongest military in the world. It is the strongest, best prepared, best equipped it has ever been. There is very little difference in the budget that I've proposed in the Republican budget over the next 6-year period. We are spending a lot of money to modernize our weapons system. I have proposed a lot of new investments to improve the quality of life for our soldiers, for our men and women in uniform, for their families, for their training. That is my solemn obligation. You ask, when do you decide to deploy them? The interests of the American people must be at stake. Our values must be at stake. We have to be able to make a difference. And frankly, we have to consider what the risks are to our young men and women in uniform. But I believe the evidence is that our deployments have been successful in Haiti, in Bosnia, when we moved to Kuwait to repel Saddam Hussein's threatened invasion of Kuwait, when I have sent the fleet into the Taiwan Straits, when we've worked hard to end the North Korean nuclear threat. I believe the United States is at peace tonight in part because of the disciplined, careful, effective deployment of our military resources.
Senator Dole.
Well, I failed to mention North Korea and Cuba a while ago. You look at North Korea, where they have enough plutonium to build 6 nuclear bombs. where we've sort of distanced ourselves from our allies, South Korea. They lost about 1 million people in the war, the Korean War, the forgotten war. We lost 53,000 Americans. We shouldn't be doing any favors for North Korea. It's a closed society. We don't have any inspection. We don't know whether it's going to work or not. But we keep giving them these incentives. Some would call them something else. Incentives. We don't know what's going to happen. Here we have Cuba 90 miles from our shores. And what have we done? We passed a law that gave people a right to sue, and the President postponed it for 6 months. I mean, it seemed to me if you want to send a signal, you've got to send a signal, Mr. President. The sooner the better off will be if we put tougher sanctions on Castro, not try to make it easier for him.
Mr. President, what is your attitude toward Cuba and how Cuba should be treated?
Well, first of all, for the last 4 years, we have worked hard to put more and more pressure on the Castro government to bring about more openness and a move toward democracy. In 1992, before I became president, Congress passed the Cuba Democracy Act, and I enforced it vigorously. We made the embargo tougher, but we increased contacts people to people with the Cubans, including direct telephone service, which was largely supported by the Cuban-American community. Then Cuba shot down 2 of our planes and murdered 4 people in international airspace. They were completely beyond the pale of the law, and I signed the Helms-Burton legislation. Senator Dole is correct. I did give about 6 months before the effective date of the act for lawsuits can actually be filed, even though they're effective now and can be legally binding, because I want to change Cuba. And the United States needs help from other countries. Nobody in the world agrees with our policy on Cuba now, but this law can be used as leverage to get other countries to help us to move Cuba to democracy. Every single country in Latin America, Central America, and the Caribbean is a democracy tonight but Cuba. And if we stay firm and strong, we will be able to bring Cuba around as well.
Well, that's the point I made. We have to be firm and strong, and I hope that will happen. It will happen starting next January, and maybe it can happen the balance of this year. We have not been firm and strong. You look at the poor people who still live in Cuba. It's a haven for drug smugglers, and we don't have a firm policy when it comes to Fidel Castro. In my view, the policy has failed. So Congress passes a law, the President signs it like he does a lot of things, but like welfare reform, well, I'm going to sign it, but I'm going to try to change it next year. I mean, a lot of these election year conversions, the President talking about all the drug money and all the other things, all this anti-smoking campaign, all happened in 1996. And I think the people viewing out there ought to go back and take a look at the record. When he fought a balanced budget amendment, when he gave you that biggest tax increase in history, when he tried to take over your health care system, when he fought regulatory reform that cost the average family $6,000 to $7,000 a year. This is serious business. It's about your family. It's about your business. And in this case, it's about a firmer policy with Cuba.
There were several off-the-subject whoppers in that litany. Let me just mention, Senator Dole voted for $900 billion in tax increases. His running mate, Jack Kemp, once said that Bob Dole never met a tax he didn't hike. And everybody knows, including the Wall Street Journal, hardly a friend of the Democratic Party or this administration, that the '82 tax increase he sponsored in inflation-adjusted dollars was the biggest tax increase in American history. So we ought to at least get the facts out here on the table so we can know where to go from here.
Senator Dole, you mentioned health reform several times. What do you think should be done about the health care system?
Let me first answer that question about the 1982 tax cut. You know, we were closing loopholes. We were going after big corporations. I know you probably would oppose it, Mr. President, but I think we should have a fair system and a flatter system, and we'll have a fair, flatter system, and we're going to make the economic package work. Health care, well, we finally passed the Kassebaum bill. The President was opposed to it in 1993. He wanted to give us this big system that took over about 1/7 the economy, that put on price controls, created all these state alliances. It would cost $1.5 trillion and force people into managed care, whether they want it or not. Most people want to see their own doctor. They're going to see their own doctor when Bob Dole is president. We won't threaten anybody. So we passed the Kassebaum-Kennedy bill. That'll cover about 20 to 25 million people. We've been for that for 4, 5, or 6 years. The President held it up. And even when it finally got near passage, Senator Kennedy held it up for 100 days because he wasn't satisfied with one provision. But it will cover pre-existing condition. If you change your job, you're going to be covered. So there are a lot of good things in this bill that we should have done instead of trying this massive, massive takeover by the federal government. But then, of course, they had a Democratic Congress, and they didn't want to do that. Instead, we got a Republican Congress. We finally got action, and I'm very proud of my colleagues in the Republican Party for getting that done. It means a lot to a lot of people watching us tonight.
Well, that sounds very good, but it's very wrong. Senator Dole remembers well that we actually offered not to even put in a health care bill in 1994, 93, but instead to work with the Senate Republicans and write a joint bill. And they said no, because they got a memo from one of their political advisors saying that instead they should characterize whatever we did as big government and make sure nothing was done to aid health care before the '94 elections so they could make that claim. Well, maybe we bit off more than we could chew, but we're pursuing a step-by-step reform now. The Kennedy-Kassebaum bill that I signed will make it possible for 25 million people to keep their health insurance when they change jobs or somebody in their family's been sick. I signed a bill to stop these drive-by deliveries where insurance companies can force people out of the hospital after 24 hours. And I vetoed Senator Dole's Medicare plan that would have forced a lot of seniors into managed care and taken a lot more money out of their pockets and led to Medicare withering on the vine.
Well, many of the provisions in the Kassebaum bill were provisions of my provisions, like deductions for long-term care, making certain that self-employed people who are watching tonight can deduct not 30%, but 80% of you pay for premiums. You can also deduct long-term care now. So it's a good start. I think there's another. We're even looking at our tax cut proposal, our economic package. There may be a way there to reach out to the uninsured, because there are a lot of uninsured people in this country, particularly children, that should be covered. Another way you can do is to expand Medicaid. In America, no one will go without health care. No one will go without food.
Senator, go ahead and finish your sentence. Sorry.
Food.
Food. Back to foreign affairs for a moment, Mr. President. Are you satisfied with the way you handled this last Iraq crisis and the end result?
Well, I believe that we did the appropriate thing under the circumstances. Saddam Hussein is under a UN resolution not to threaten his neighbors or repress his own citizens. Unfortunately, a lot of people have never been as concerned about the Kurds as the United States has tried to be, and we've been flying an operation to protect them out of Turkey for many years now. What happened was one of the Kurdish leaders invited him to go up north. But we felt, since the whole world community had told him not to do it, that once he did it, we had to do something. We did not feel that I certainly didn't feel I should commit American troops to throw him out of where he had gone, and that was the only way to do that. So the appropriate thing strategically to do was to reduce his ability to threaten his neighbors. We did that by expanding what's called the no-fly zone, by increasing our allies' control of the airspace now from the Kuwait border to the suburbs of Baghdad. Was it the right thing to do? I believe it was. Is it fully effective? Did it make him withdraw from the north? Well, he has a little bit, and I hope he will continue. We have learned that if you give him an inch, he'll take a mile. We had to do something, and even though not all of our allies supported it at first, I think most of them now believe that what we did was an appropriate thing to do.
Senator Nolan.
Well, the President's own CIA director says that Saddam is stronger now than he was. And I don't understand extending the no-fly zone in the south when the trouble was in the north. And what we've done during the Bush administration, the Kurds were at the State Department negotiating, trying to work their differences out. Now we've got all thousands and thousands of refugees. We've been shipping, I guess, 3,000 Kurds to Guam. It involves Turkey, and it's a real problem, and Saddam is probably stronger than he ever was. We shot, 44 cruise missiles? They're worth about $1.2 million apiece, and hit some radar that repaired in a couple of 3 days. Did we inflict any damage? No. Do we have any of our allies helping? Well, we have Great Britain. They're always very loyal to us, and I appreciate that. And, of course, Kuwait, even though they had to find out they had 5,000 troops coming, they didn't even understand that. We had to get their permission. The bottom line is we went in there alone. We're supposed to be operating under UN resolution. We did it without any of our allies that helped us in the Gulf.
Senator Dole has 2 or 3 times before tonight criticized me for working with the UN. Now I'm being criticized for not working with the UN.
That's not the UN.
Sometimes the United States has to act alone, or at least has to act first. Sometimes we cannot let other countries have a veto on our foreign policy. I could not send soldiers into the north of Iraq. That would have been wrong. I could reduce Saddam Hussein's ability to threaten Kuwait and his other neighbors again. That's what I did. I still believe it was the right thing to do.
Senator Dole, on your photo op foreign policy charge against the president.
Not mine.
Oh? No, I mean your charge against the president that he has a photo op foreign policy. Does the Middle East summit last week fall into that category?
Well, there were some good pictures, but does it fall in that category? I don't know. I want to be very serious. I've supported the president when I thought he was right on Bosnia. I supported him on NAFTA and GATT. So it's not that we always disagree. Others disagreed with us. The Mideast is very difficult. But it seemed to me, just as an observer, that before you'd call somebody to America, you'd have some notion what the end result might be. Now, maybe it's better just to get together and sit down and talk. Maybe that was the purpose. And I know talks have started again today. But again, it's almost like an ad hoc foreign policy. It's ad hoc. It's sort of, well, we get up in the morning and read the papers, and what country's in trouble, we'll have a meeting. To me, that's not the strategy that I think that people expect from America. I think we have lost credibility. And I say this very honestly, without any partisanship. We've lost credibility around the world. Our allies know they're not certain what we're going to do, what our reaction, what our response is going to be. Nobody suggested sending troops to Iraq, if that was the hint there from the president. But I do think that Saddam Hussein is stronger than he was, and I do believe that he didn't gain a great deal in the Mideast by bringing 3 of the 4 leaders. One refused to come to Washington, D.C.
We have a very consistent policy in the Middle East. It is to support the peace process, to support the security of Israel, and to support those who are prepared to take risks for peace. It is a very difficult environment. The feelings are very strong. There are extremists in all parts of the Middle East who want to kill that peace process. Prime Minister Rabin gave his life because someone in his own country literally hated him for trying to bring peace. I would like to have had a big organized summit, but those people were killing each other rapidly. Innocent Arab children, innocent Israeli people, they were dying. And so much trust is broken down in the aftermath of the change of government. I felt that if I could just get the parties together to say, let's stop the violence, start talking, commit to the negotiations, that would be a plus. Now today, the Secretary of State is in the Middle East, and they've started negotiations, and all those leaders promised me they would not quit until they resolved the issues between them and got the peace process going forward again.
Senator Dole?
Well, I was disappointed the president not call for an unconditional end to the violence. I mean, it seemed to me the violence had stopped when these leaders came to America. The killing and the tragedies had taken place, and it's unfortunate. And it is a difficult area, no doubt about it. It shouldn't be politicized in any way by the president or by his opponent, and I don't intend to politicize it. I hope that they've talked, and I hope they reach some result, and that the killing will end.
Mr. President, in your acceptance speech in Chicago, you said the real choice in this race is, quote, whether we build a bridge to the future or a bridge to the past, about whether we believe our best days are still out there or our best days are behind us, about whether we want a country of people all working together or one where you're on your own, end quote. Are you saying that you believe Senator Dole is a man of the past, and if elected president, he would lead the country backward?
Well, I'm saying that Senator Dole said in his fine speech in San Diego that he wanted to build a bridge to the past. And I think I know what he meant by that. He's troubled, as I am, by some of the things that go on today. But I believe America is the greatest country in human history because we have maintained freedom and increasing prosperity by relentlessly pushing the barriers of knowledge, the barriers of the present, always moving into the future. That's why when I became president, I was determined to kind of move beyond this old stale debate that had gone on in Washington for too long to get this country moving again. And that's why we've got a country with 10.5 million more jobs and record numbers of new businesses and rising incomes and falling crime rates and welfare roll rates. It's why we're moving in the right direction. And I'm trying to emphasize that what I want to do is to continue to do that. That's why my balanced budget plan will still invest and grow this economy. That's why I want a tax cut for education and child rearing, but it's got to be paid for. That's why I want to continue the work we have done over partisan opposition to work with communities to bring that crime rate down until our streets are all safe again. These are my commitments. I am very oriented toward the future. I think this election has to be geared toward the future. I think America's best days are still ahead, but we've got to build the right bridge.
You know, the president reminds me sometimes of my brother Kenny, who's no longer alive, but Kenny was a great talker. And he used to tell me things that I knew were not quite accurate, so we always had a rule: we divide it by 6. Now, maybe in your case, maybe just 2. But 11 million new jobs and everything. I mean, the president can't take credit for everything that governors are doing, or that's happening in New York City when it comes to the murder rate, and then not be responsible for the bad things that happen, whether it's drug use or something else in America. I don't fault the president or the vice president for sending their children to private schools or better schools. I applaud them for it. I don't criticize them. But why shouldn't everybody have that choice? Why shouldn't low-income Americans and low-middle-income Americans? I'm excited about it. It's going to be a big, big opportunity for a lot of people.
Let me say, first of all, I'm all for students having more choices. We've worked hard to expand public school choice. In my balanced budget bill, there's funds for 3,000 new schools created by teachers and parents, sometimes by business people, called charter schools, that have no rules. They're free of bureaucracy and can only stay in existence if they perform and teach children. The ones that are out there are doing well. What I'm against is Senator Dole's plan to take money away from all the children we now help with limited federal funds and help far fewer. If we're going to have a private voucher plan, that ought to be done at the local level or the state level. But Senator Dole has consistently opposed federal help to education. He voted against student loans. He voted against my improved student loan plan. He voted against the National Service Bill, against the Head Start bill. He voted against our efforts in safe and drug-free schools. He has voted against these programs. He does not believe it. That's the issue. 90% of our kids are out there in those public schools, and we need to lift their standards and move them forward with the programs like those I've outlined in this campaign.
I better correct the president. I don't know what time it is, but it's probably getting late. But I want to correct the president. All these things I voted against, they were probably part of some big package that had a lot of pork in it, or a lot of things we shouldn't have had, and we probably voted no. I've supported all the education program. I've supported Head Start. I think we ought to look at it. So I don't want anybody out there to think that we've just been voting no, no, no. Let's give low-income parents the same right that people with power and prestige have in America, and let them go to better schools. Let's turn the schools back to the teachers and back to the parents, and take it away from the National Education Association.
Mr. President, what's wrong with the school choice proposal?
I support school choice. I support school choice. I have advocated expansions of public school choice alternatives, and I said the creation of 3,000 new schools that we are going to help the states to finance. But if you're going to have a private voucher plan, that ought to be determined by states and localities where they're raising and spending most of the money. I simply think it's wrong to take money away from programs that are helping build basic skills for kids. 90% of them are in the public schools. To take money away from programs that are helping fund the school lunch program, that are helping to fund the other programs that are helping our schools to improve their standards. Our schools are getting better, and our schools can be made to be even better still with the right kind of community leadership and partnership at the school level. I have been a strong force for reform. And Senator, I remind you that a few years ago when I supported teacher testing law in my home state, I was pretty well lambasted by the Teachers Association. I just don't believe we ought to be out there running down teachers and attacking them the way you did at the Republican convention. I think we ought to be lifting them up and moving our children forward. And let me just say, that budget you passed that I vetoed would have cut 50,000 kids out of Head Start. It would have eliminated the AmeriCorps plan, and it would have cut back on student loans and scholarships. Now, it would have. That's a fact. That's one of the big reasons I vetoed it. We need to be doing more in education, not less.
Well, the AmeriCorps program, I must say, if that's one of your successes, I wouldn't speak about it too loudly. It's cost about $27,000 to pay people to volunteer. We've got 4 million young people volunteering every year. The number hasn't gone down. And you pick out 20,000, whether they need the money or not, and they get paid for volunteering. I like young people. I like teachers. I'm a product of public schools. You attended a private school for some time in your life. I like teachers. But you're not for school choice. You can't be for school choice, because this is that special interest money again. When you get 99.5% of the money, we don't know what happened to the other 0.5%. We're looking for it. Somebody got it. But it all went to Democrats. And this is part of that liberal establishment, one of those liberal things that you just can't do. You're for school uniforms and curfews, and you're opposed to truancy. Now, that's not reform, Mr. President. Why can't Landell Shakespeare in Cleveland or Pilar Gonzalez in Milwaukee give their children an opportunity to go to a better school? Some schools aren't safe. Some schools aren't even safe. And your choice is nothing. Let's give them a real choice, the kind of choice you have, and the kind of choice a lot of people have in America. If we want to stop crime and teenage pregnancy, let's start with education.
First of all, Senator Dole, let's set the record straight. I was able for 2 years when I was a very young boy to go to a Catholic school, but I basically went to public schools all my life. And I've worked hard for a long time to make them better. 90% of our kids are there. It's amazing to me. You are all for having more responsibility at the local level for everything except schools, where we don't have very much money at the federal level to spend on education. We ought to spend it helping the 90% of the kids that we can help. If a local school district in Cleveland or any place else wants to have a private school choice plan like Milwaukee did, let them have at it. I might say the results are highly ambiguous, but I want to get out there and give a better education opportunity to all of our children, and that's why I vetoed the budget that you passed with $30 billion in education cuts. It was wrong, and my plan for the future is better.
Senator Dole, at the Republican convention, you said the following, and I quote, "It is demeaning to the nation that within the Clinton administration, a core of the elite who never grew up, never did anything real, never sacrificed, never suffered, and never learned, should have the power to fund with your earnings their dubious and self-serving schemes," end quote. Whom precisely and what precisely did you have in mind?
I had precisely in mind a lot of the people who were in the White House and other agencies who've never had any experience, who came to Washington without any experience. They're all very liberal, of course. They wouldn't be in the administration. And their idea was that they knew what was best for the American people. Now, I feel very strongly about a lot of things. I feel strongly about education. I want to help young people have an education, just as I had an education after World War II with the GI Bill of Rights, and we've had millions of young men and women in subsequent wars change the face of the nation because the government helped with their education. Now, the reason they don't have, the reason the President can't support this is pretty obvious. It's not taking anything away from schools. It's new money. It's not going to be taken away from anybody else, except we'll downsize the Department of Education. But this is a very liberal administration. This is an administration that gave you the big tax cut. This administration that tried to take over health care and impose a governmental system. This is the administration that fought regulatory reform that's putting a lot of small businessmen and small businesswomen out of business. This administration that fought the balanced budget amendment and vetoed a balanced budget and vetoed welfare reform twice. And the list goes on and on and on. That's what I had in mind. I want people in my administration, and we'll have people in my administration, who understand America. There won't be 10 millionaires and 14 lawyers in the cabinet. There'll be people with experience and people who understand America and people who've made it and know the hard knocks in life.
When Senator Dole made that remark about all the elitists, young elitists in the administration, one of the young men who works for me, who grew up in a house trailer, looked at me and said, "Mr. President, I know how you grew up. Who is he talking about?" And this liberal charge, that's what their party always drags out when they get in a tight race. It's sort of their golden oldie, It's a record they think they can play that everybody loves to hear. And I just don't think that dog will hunt this time. The American people should make up their own mind. Here's the record. We cut the deficit 4 years in a row for the first time since before the Civil War. I mean, before World War II, and maybe before the Civil War, too. We've got 10.5 million new jobs. We've got record numbers of those new small businesses. We made every one of them eligible for a tax cut. We've got declining crime rates, 2 million fewer people on welfare rolls before welfare reform passed, and a 50% increase in child support, and a crime bill with 60 death penalties, 100,000 police, and the assault weapons ban. The American people can make up their mind about whether that's a liberal record or a record that's good for America. Liberal, conservative, you put whatever label you want on it.
Well, I think it's pretty liberal. I'll put that label on it. When you take a look at all the programs you've advocated, Mr. President, thank goodness we had a Republican Congress there. The first thing you did when you came into office was send up a stimulus package. Say, we got a little pork we want to scatter around America, $16 billion. And even some in your own party couldn't buy that. I remember talking to you by the telephone. I'm not even certain you were too excited about it. I'll never repeat what I talked with the President about, but in any event, we saved the taxpayers $16 billion. And then came some other programs, and then came health care, and then came the tax increase. And a lot of these things just stopped in 1994 because then the Congress changed, and I think we've done a good job.
Mr. President, if you're not a liberal, describe your political philosophy.
I believe that the purpose of politics is to give people the tools to make the most of their own lives, to reinforce the values of opportunity and responsibility, and to build a sense of community so we're all working together. I don't believe in discrimination. I believe you can protect the environment and grow the economy. I believe that we have to do these things with a government that's smaller and less bureaucratic, but that we have to do them nonetheless. It's inconvenient for Senator Dole, but the truth is I've reduced the size of government more than my Republican predecessors. And I did stop them. I admit that. I sure stopped their budget. Their budget cut enforcement for the Environmental Protection Agency by a third. It cut funds to clean up toxic waste dumps, with 10 million of our kids still living within 4 miles of a toxic waste dump, by a third. It ended the principle of the polluter should pay for those toxic waste dumps unless it was very recent. Their budget weakened our support for education, $30 billion, even cut funds for scholarships and college loans. Their budget cut $270 billion in Medicare, and finally, their budget withdrew the national guarantee of health care to poor children, families with children with handicaps, the elderly in nursing homes, poor pregnant women. It was wrong for the country, and calling it conservative won't make it right. It was a bad decision for America, and it would have been bad for our future if I hadn't stopped it.
Well, the President can define himself in any way he wants, but I think we have to look at the record. You go back to the time he was, Texas director for George McGovern. George McGovern's a friend of mine, so I don't mean, but he was a liberal, proud liberal. I've just finished reading a book. I think it's called, The Demise of the Democratic Party by Ronald Kardosh or something, talking about all the liberal influences in the administration, whether it's organized labor, or whether it's the Hollywood elite, or whether it's some of the media elite, or whether it's the labor unions or whatever. And so I think you take a look at it. But the bottom line is this. I think the American people probably recite all these bills and all these things. They want to know what's going to happen to them. They've all got a lot of anxieties out there. Did anybody complain when you raise taxes? Anybody go out and ask the people, how are you going to pay the extra money? That's why we want an economic package. We want the government to pinch their pennies for a change instead of the people pinching their pennies. That's what our message is to people watching. I know all this back and forth, you voted this way, you voted that way. We want a better America as we go into the next century.
The way to get a better America is to balance the budget and protect Medicare, Medicaid, education, and the environment, to give a targeted tax cut, and let me talk about the education tax cut, to let people have a $10,000 deduction for the cost of college tuition in any year, any kind of college tuition, to give families a tax credit, a dollar-for-dollar reduction in their taxes for the cost of a typical community college, so we can open that to everybody, and then to let people save in an IRA and withdraw from it without a tax penalty for education, home buying, or medical expenses. That's the right way to go into the 21st century, balance the budget and cut taxes, not balloon with this $550 billion tax scheme.
Senator Dole, we've talked mostly now about differences between the two of you that relate to policy issues and that sort of thing. Are there also significant differences in the more personal area that are relevant to this election?
Let me say first on the president's promise for another tax cut. I mean, I've told people as I travel on, all you got the tax cut he promised last time, vote for him in '96. And not many hands go up. So the question, would you buy a used election promise from my opponent? The people want economic reform. They're having a hard time making ends meet. You got one parent working for the government, the other parent working for the family. And this is important business. This is about getting the economy moving again. This is about American jobs and opportunities. It's about the government, as I said before, pinching its pennies for a change instead of the poor taxpayer. When they raise your taxes, nobody runs around asking people, where are you going to get the extra money? I think the government can do better. Are there personal differences?
That are relevant to this
Well,
election?
my blood pressure is lower and my weight, my cholesterol, but I will not make health an issue in this campaign. So I think he's a bit taller than I am, but I think there are personal differences. I mean, I don't like to get into personal matters. As far as I'm concerned, this is a campaign about issues. It's about my vision for America and about his liberal vision for America, and not about personal things. And I think his liberal vision is a thing of the past. I know he wants to disown it. I wouldn't want to be a liberal either, Mr. President, but you're stuck with it because that's your record. It's your record in Arkansas, the biggest tax increase in history, biggest crime increase in history, biggest drug increase in history in Arkansas.
Mr. President?
Well, just for the record, when I was governor, we had the lowest, second lowest tax burden of any state in the country, the highest job growth rate of any state when I ran for president, and we're widely recognized for a lot of other advances. But the important thing is, what are we going to do now? I think a targeted tax cut is better for our future, targeted to education and child rearing. With the rest of the education plan, hooking up all of our classrooms to the internet by the year 2000, making sure we've got an army of reading volunteers, trained people to teach with parents and teachers so that our 8-year-olds can learn to read, investing in our environment, cleaning up 2/3 of the worst toxic waste dumps. Those plans are better than this $550 billion tax scheme. Now, remember, folks, even Senator Dole's campaign co-chair, Senator D'Amato, says he's got to cut Medicare to pay for this. Everybody who's looked at it, 500 economists, 7 Nobel Prize winners, say it's bad for the economy. It's going to blow a hole in the deficit, raise taxes on 9 million people, and require bigger cuts than the one I vetoed. Our plan is better. It'll take us into the future with a growing economy and healthier families.
Well, I'm really encouraged to know of your renewed friendship with Al D'Amato, and I know he appreciates it. You didn't even have tax cuts in your budget, Mr. President, the first 2 years you were president. It wasn't until we had a Republican Congress you even thought about you talked about tax cuts. And getting back to personal differences, I don't, I think, Jim, if you're a little more specific, but I think the President could clarify one thing tonight, and that's the question of pardons. I know you talked about it on with Jim Lehrer on a PBS show, and I've never discussed Whitewater, as I've told you personally. I'm not discussing Whitewater now, but I am discussing a power the President has to grant pardons, and hopefully in the next segment you could lay that to rest.
Mr. President?
Well, first of all, he made that remark about Senator D'Amato. He's arranged for me to spend a lot more time with Senator D'Amato in the last couple of years, and so I'm more familiar with his comments than I used to be. Let me say what I've said already about this pardon issue. This is an issue they brought up. There's been no consideration of it, no discussion of it. I'll tell you this, I will not give anyone special treatment, and I will strictly adhere to the law, and that is what every president has done, as far as I know, in the past. But whatever other presidents have done, this is something I take seriously, and that's my position.
But it seemed to me the President shouldn't have any comment at all, particularly where it's someone where you've had business dealings. I mean, you may be sending a signal. I don't know. I'm not questioning anybody. But as the President of the United States, when somebody asks you about pardons, you say no comment, period. And I think he made a mistake. And I think when you make a mistake, you say, I made a mistake. But apparently his position hasn't changed. So if there are other specific areas, but beyond that, I haven't gotten into any of these things, as the President knows. We've had that discussion. And I know Senator Amato, I think, may have had a hearing or two on Whitewater, I can't remember. But he's not my general chairman, he's a friend of mine. And so is Senator Kennedy, a friend of yours. And
You bet.
I remember one day on the floor, I said, "Now, gentlemen, let me tax your memories." And Kennedy jumped up and said, "Why haven't we thought of that before?" You know, so one of your liberal friends.
Thank you.
Mr. President, 30 seconds.
No comment.
What's the subject matter?
Senator Dole, if you could single out one thing that you would like for the voters to have in their mind about President Clinton on a policy matter or a personal matter, what would it be? Something to know about him, understand it, and appreciate it.
See, if I say anything, it's going to be misconstrued. I don't think there's even a race between the two. It's about our vision for America. I happen to like President Clinton personally. I'm addressing him all evening, Mr. President. I said in 1992 he didn't extend that courtesy of President Bush. But I respect the presidency. I've served under a number of presidents. They all have their strengths and they all have their weaknesses. So I'd rather talk about my strengths. I think I have my strengths. I think the best thing going for Bob Dole is that Bob Dole keeps his word. It's a question between trust and fear, and I would say, I think, Mr. President, about all you've got going in this campaign is fear. You're spending millions and millions of dollars in negative ads frightening senior citizens. I know this to be a fact because I had one tell me last week, "Senator, don't cut my Medicare." I'm trying to save your Medicare, just as I rescued Social Security with a bipartisan commission. I have relatives on Medicare. I used to sign welfare checks for my grandparents. I know all about poverty and all about need and all about taking care of people, and that's been my career in the United States Senate. And I'll keep my word on the economic package. If I couldn't cut taxes and balance the budget at the same time, I wouldn't look you in the eye tonight in your living room, wherever you may be, and say that this is good for America. People will tell you who served with Bob Dole, would agree or disagree, he kept his word. That's what this race is all about.
I'd like the American people to know that I have worked very hard to be on their side and to move this country forward, and we're better off than we were 4 years ago. But the most important thing is my plan for the 21st century is a better plan. A targeted tax cut, a real commitment to educational reform, a deep commitment to making welfare reform work with incentives to the private sector to move people from welfare to work. Now we have to create those jobs now that we're requiring people to go to work. A commitment to continuing step-by-step health care reform, with the next step helping people who are between jobs to access health care and not lose it just because they're out of work for a while. A commitment to grow the economy while protecting the environment. That's what I'd like them to know about me, that I've gotten up every day and worked for the American people and worked so that their children could have their dreams come true. And I believe we've got the results to show we're on the right track. The most important thing is I believe we've got the right ideas for the future. And I like Senator Dole. I like Senator Dole. You can probably tell we like each other. We just see the world in different ways, and you folks out there are going to have to choose who you think is right.
Well, I'd say that, the first homeless bill in the Senate was the Dole-Byrd bill, part of the Byrd-Dole bill. I can't remember who was in control then. I remember working with Senator Ribicoff in Connecticut on the hospice program. We now have 2,500 hospices. As I said, I've worked all my life while I was in the Congress. I left on June the 11th because I wanted the American people to know that I was willing to give up something. President Clinton ran for governor in 1990 and said he's going to fill out his term, but he didn't. He's president, so I guess it's a little better deal. But I wanted the American people to know that I was willing to give up something. It wasn't just getting more power and more power. So I rolled the dice. I put my career on the line because I really believe the future of America is on the line. We can give you all these numbers. They don't mean a thing. If you're out of work, you have nothing to eat, or you can't have medical care, or you're holding a crack baby in your arms right now, And what do you do next? You know, America's best days are ahead of us. I've seen the tough times. I know they can be better. And I'll lead America to a brighter future.
Mr. President, what do you say to Senator Dole's point that this election is about keeping one's word?
Let's look at that. When I ran for president, I said we'd cut the deficit in half in 4 years. We cut it by 60%. I said that our economic plan would produce 8 million jobs. We have 10.5 million new jobs. We're number one in autos again, record numbers of new small businesses. I said we'd pass a crime bill that would put 100,000 police on the street, ban assault weapons, and deal with the problems that ought to be dealt with capital punishment, including capital punishment for drug kingpins. And we did that. I said we would change the way welfare works, and even before the bill passed, we'd move nearly 2 million people from welfare to work, working with states and communities. I said we'd get tougher on child support, and child support enforcement's up 50%. I said that I would work for tax relief for middle-class Americans. The deficit was bigger than I thought it was going to be, and I think they're better off, all of us are, that we got those interest rates down and the deficit down. The Republicans talk about it, but we're the first administration in anybody's lifetime looking at this program to bring that deficit down 4 years in a row. We still gave tax cuts to 15 million working Americans, and now I've got a plan that's been out there for 2 years. It could have been passed already, but instead the Republicans shut the government down to try to force their budget and their plan on me, and I couldn't take that. But we'll get the rest of that tax relief. And so I think when you can look at those results, you know that the plan I've laid out for the future has a very good chance of being enacted if you'll give me a chance to build that bridge to the 21st century.
Senator?
Well, there he goes again. I mean, it's a line that's been used before, but exaggerating all the things that he did. He didn't do all these things. Let's take all these 4 years in a row. He came in with a high growth rate. The 1990 budget agreement, which some didn't like, had some very tough cost controls, put a lot of pressure on Congress. The S&L crisis was over. They're starting to sell assets. All that money was coming in. And he cut defense, an extra $60 billion. Threw a lot of people out of work. He talks about a smaller government. There are actually more people in government, except for people in defense-related jobs. They're gone. The government's bigger than it was when President Kennedy was around. He says it's not. In addition, the Republican Congress cut $53 billion. So let's give credit where credit is due. Governor Engler of Michigan cut taxes 21 times, created a lot of new jobs. So did Governor Thompson. So did Governor Rowland. And a lot of people out there deserve credit, Mr. President. When I'm President of the United States, we're going to have a governor's council. And we're going to go work directly with the governors, Republicans and Democrats, to get power back to the people and back to the states.
I think a lot of people deserve credit, and I've tried to give it to them. But I believe that my plan is better than Senator Dole's ill-advised $550 billion scheme, which I'll say again will blow a hole in the deficit. Our plan will balance the budget and grow the economy, preserve the environment, and invest in education. We have the right approach for the future, and look at the results. It is not midnight in America, Senator. We are better off than we were 4 years ago.
All right, that's the last question, the last answer. Let's go now to the closing statements. Mr. President, you're first. 2 minutes.
Well, first, Jim, let me thank you, and thank you, Senator Dole, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, all of you listening tonight, for the chance you've given us to appear. I want to say in the beginning that I am profoundly grateful for the chance that you have given me to serve as president for the last 4 years. I never could have dreamed anything like this would come my way in life, and I've done my best to be faithful to the charge you've given me. I'm proud of the fact that America is stronger and more prosperous and more secure than we were 4 years ago. I'm glad we're going in the right direction. And I've done my best tonight to lay out my plans for going forward to an even better future in the next century. I'd like to leave you with the thought that the things I do as president are basically driven by the people whose lives I have seen affected by what does or doesn't happen in this country. The auto worker in Toledo who was unemployed when I was elected and now has a great job because we're number one in auto production again. All the people I've met who used to be on welfare who are now working and raising their children. And I think what others could do for our country and for themselves if we did the welfare reform thing in the proper way. I think of the man who grabbed me by the shoulder once with tears in his eyes and said his daughter was dying of cancer, and he thanked me for giving him a chance to spend some time with her without losing his job because of the Family and Medical Leave Act. I think of all the people that I grew up with and went to school with, whom I stay in touch with, and who never let me forget how what we do in Washington affects all of you out there in America. Folks, we can build that bridge to the 21st century, big enough and strong enough for all of us to walk across, and I hope that you will help me build it.
Senator Dole, your closing statement, sir.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank everyone for watching and listening. I want to address my remarks to the young people of America, because they're the ones who are going to spend most of their life in the 21st century. They're the ones who have the challenges, and there are people out there making predictions that it's not going to be the same. You're not going to have the opportunities. It's going to be more deficits, more drugs, more crime, and less confidence in the American people. And that's what you're faced with, the parents are faced with, and the grandparents are faced with. It's important. It's their future. And I would say to those, I know there are more young people experimenting with drugs today than ever before. Drug use has gone up. And if you care about the future of America, if you care about your future, just don't do it. And I know that I'm someone older than you, but I've had my anxious moments in my life. I've learned to feed myself and to walk and to dress. And I'm standing here as proof that in America, the possibilities are unlimited. I know who I am, and I know where I'm from, and I know where I want to take America. We are the greatest country on the face of the earth. We do more good things for more people in our communities, our neighborhoods, than anywhere that I know of. This is important business. This election is important. I ask for your support. I ask for your help. If you really want to get involved, just tap into my homepage, www.dolecamp96.org. Thank you. God bless America.
Senator Dole.
Funding for this program is provided by Consumer Cellular, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Judy Woodruff, and welcome to the PBS NewsHour special uninterrupted coverage of the only vice presidential debate of this 2020 election. In just a few moments, Vice President Mike Pence and California Senator Kamala Harris will be on the stage at Kingsbury Hall on the campus of the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. Pence has served under President Trump for almost 4 years. Senator Harris has made history by being the first woman of color to be nominated by a major political party to serve as vice president. They meet at a time of maximum upheaval in the presidential campaign. President Trump tested positive for the coronavirus just 2 days after his debate last week with former Vice President Joe Biden, a debate in which the president made headlines for his aggressive approach, repeatedly interrupting Biden and the moderator. Both the Pence and Harris camps say they have tested negative for COVID, but because of the president's diagnosis, additional social distancing rules have been instituted for this debate at the request of the Biden-Harris campaign. Plexiglass barriers have been placed between the candidates, who will be seated. Tonight's moderator is Susan Page of USA Today. I'm in our NewsHour studio. Our reporters and analysts will be joining me remotely so we can all stay safe. That is White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor and congressional correspondent Lisa Desjardins, who's covering the Biden campaign. Senior national correspondent Amna Nawaz, who'll be watching the debate with a half a dozen voters linked in virtually from around the country. Plus, Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report, along with Washington Post columnist Jonathan Capehart, and Eliana Johnson, editor-in-chief of the Washington Free Beacon. And I welcome all of you to our coverage tonight. A quick word first from Yamiche and Lisa. Yamiche, what is the Trump campaign hoping comes from this debate with the vice president?
Well, the vice president is going to be delivering not a more brash defense of the Trump administration, but he is going to be delivering a very pointed defense of that. He is the head of the coronavirus task force, so he's going to be talking a lot about what they think they did right. He's also going to be making the point that the Black Lives Matter protesters have gotten out of hand because he's bringing as one of his guests an African-American business owner whose business was hurt and destroyed during the protests after George Floyd's death.
And Lisa, what about the Biden-Harris campaign? What are they looking for?
The Biden campaign is trying to manage expectations today, saying Pence can be a very smooth operator when it comes to delivery. But, you know, Harris has the more recent debate experience, and what the Biden campaign is hoping is that she will be able to personally connect tonight.
I think a lot of us will be watching to see how this debate differs from the debate we saw last week when it was, in some words, a smackdown between the president and Joe Biden. Moderator Susan Page is on the stage. She's about to introduce the candidates. Let's go to Susan.
Good evening. From the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, welcome to the first and only vice presidential debate of 2020, sponsored by the Nonpartisan Commission on Presidential Debates. I'm Susan Page of USA Today. It is my honor to moderate this debate, an important part of our democracy. In Kingsbury Hall tonight, we have a small and socially distant audience, and we've taken extra precautions during this pandemic. Among other things, everyone in the audience is required to wear a face mask, and the candidates will be seated 12 feet apart. The audience is enthusiastic about their candidates, but they've agreed to express that enthusiasm only twice, at the end of the debate and now when I introduce the candidates. Please welcome California Senator Kamala Harris and Vice President Mike Pence.
Thank you.
Senator Harris and Vice President Pence, thank you for being here. We're meeting as President Trump and the First Lady continue to undergo treatment in Washington after testing positive for COVID-19. We send our thoughts and prayers to them for their rapid and complete recovery and for the recovery of everyone afflicted by the coronavirus. The two campaigns and the Commission on Presidential Debates have agreed to the ground rules for tonight. I'm here to enforce them on behalf of the millions of Americans who are watching. One note, no one in either campaign or at the Commission or anywhere else has been told in advance what topics I'll raise or what questions I'll ask. This 90-minute debate will be divided into 9 segments of about 10 minutes each. I'll begin a segment by posing a question to each of you, sometimes the same question, sometimes a different question on the same topic. You will then have 2 minutes to answer without interruption by me or the other candidate. Then we'll take 6 minutes or so to discuss the issue. At that point, although there will always be more to say, we'll move on to the next topic. We want a debate that is lively, but Americans also deserve a discussion that is civil. These are tumultuous times, but we can and will have a respectful exchange about the big issues facing our nation. Let's begin with the ongoing pandemic that has cost our country so much. Senator Harris, the coronavirus is not under control. Over the past week, Johns Hopkins reports that 39 states have had more COVID cases over the past 7 days than in the week before. 9 states have set new records. Even if a vaccine is released soon, the next administration will face hard choices. What would a Biden administration do in January and February that a Trump administration wouldn't do? Would you impose new lockdowns for businesses and schools and hotspots? A federal mandate to wear masks? You have 2 minutes to respond without interruption.
Thank you, Susan. Well, the American people have witnessed what is the greatest failure of any presidential administration in the history of our country. And here are the facts. 210,000 dead people in our country in just the last several months. Over 7 million people who have contracted this disease. 1 in 5 businesses closed. We're looking at frontline workers who have been treated like sacrificial workers. We are looking at over 30 million people who in the last several months had to file for unemployment. And here's the thing. On January 28th, the Vice President and the President were informed about the nature of this pandemic. They were informed that it's lethal in consequence, that it is airborne, that it will affect young people, and that it would be contracted because it is airborne. And they knew what was happening, and they didn't tell you. Can you imagine if you knew on January 28th, as opposed to March 13th, what they knew, what you might have done to prepare? They knew, and they covered it up. The president said it was a hoax. They minimized the seriousness of it. The president said, you're on one side of his ledger if you wear a mask, you're on the other side of his ledger if you don't. And in spite of all of that, today they still don't have a plan. They still don't have a plan. Well, Joe Biden does. And our plan is about what we need to do around a national strategy for contact tracing, for testing, for administration of the vaccine, and making sure that it will be free for all. That is the plan that Joe Biden has and that I have, knowing that we have to get a hold of what has been going on, and we need to save our country. And Joe Biden is the best leader to do that. And frankly, this administration has forfeited their right to re-election based on this.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Vice President Pence, more than 210,000 Americans have died of COVID-19 since February. The U.S. death toll as a percentage of our population is higher than that of almost every other wealthy nation on earth. For instance, our death rate is 2.5 times that of Canada next door. You head the administration's coronavirus task force. Why is the U.S. death toll as a percentage of our population higher than that of almost every other wealthy country? And you have 2 minutes to respond without interruption.
Susan, thank you. And I want to thank the Commission and the University of Utah for hosting this event. And Senator Harris, it's a privilege to be on the stage with you. And our nation has gone through a very challenging time this year. But I want the American people to know that from the very first day, President Donald Trump has put the health of America first. Before there were more than 5 cases in the United States, all people who had returned from China, President Donald Trump did what no other American president had ever done. And that was he suspended all travel from China, the second largest economy in the world. Now, Senator Joe Biden opposed that decision. He said it was xenophobic and hysterical. But I can tell you, having led the White House Coronavirus Task Force, that that decision alone by President Trump bought us invaluable time to stand up the greatest national mobilization since World War II. And I believe it saved hundreds of thousands of American lives. Because with that time, we were able to reinvent testing. More than 115 million tests have been done to date. We were able to see to the delivery of billions of supplies so our doctors and nurses had the resource and support they needed. And we began, really, before the month of February was out, to develop a vaccine and to develop medicines and therapeutics that have been saving lives all along the way. And under President Trump's leadership, Operation Warp Speed, we believe, will have literally tens of millions of doses of a vaccine before the end of this year. The reality is, when you look at the Biden plan, it reads an awful lot like what President Trump and I and our task force have been doing every step of the way. I mean, quite frankly, when I look at their plan that talks about advancing testing, creating new PPE, developing a vaccine, It looks a little bit like plagiarism, which is something Joe Biden knows a little bit about. And I think the American people know that this is a president who has put the health of America first, and the American people, I believe with my heart, can be proud of the sacrifices they have made. It's saved countless American lives.
Senator Harris, would you like to respond?
Absolutely. Whatever the vice president is claiming the administration has done, clearly it hasn't worked. When you're looking at over 210,000 dead bodies in our country, American lives that have been lost, families that are grieving that loss. And you know, the vice president is the head of the task force and knew on January 28th how serious this was. And then thanks to Bob Woodward, we learned that they knew about it. And then when that was exposed, the vice president said, when asked, well, why didn't y'all tell anybody? He said, because the president wanted people to remain calm.
Well, let's get
no, but Susan, this is important.
Susan,
I want to add, but Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking.
I'm
speaking.
Yeah, you can have 15 more seconds, and then we'll give the vice president a chance to respond.
So I want to ask the American people, how calm were you when you were panicked about where you're going to get your next roll of toilet paper? How calm were you when your kids were sent home from school and you didn't know when they could go back? How calm were you when your children couldn't see your parents because you were afraid they could kill them?
Let's give Vice President Pence a chance to respond. Vice President Pence, you have 1 minute to respond.
You know, there's not a day gone by that I haven't thought of every American family that's lost a loved one. And I want all of you to know that you'll always be in our hearts and in our prayers. But when you say what the American people have done over these last 8 months hasn't worked, that's a great disservice to the sacrifices the American people have made. The reality, if I may finish, Senator, the reality is Dr. Fauci said everything that he told the president in the Oval Office, the president told the American people. Now, President Trump, I will tell you, has boundless confidence in the American people, and he always spoke with confidence that we'd get through this together. But when you say it hasn't worked, when Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx and our medical experts came to us in the second week of March, they said if the president didn't take the unprecedented step of shutting down roughly half of the American economy, that we could lose 2.2 million Americans. And that's the reality.
Thank you.
They also said to us if we did everything right, Susan, we could still lose more than 200,000 Americans.
Vice President
now, one
Pence,
life lost is too many, Susan. But the American people, I believe, deserve credit for the sacrifices that they have made, putting the health of their family and their neighbors first, our doctors, our nurses, our first responders.
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
And I'm going to speak up on behalf of what the American people have done.
Vice President Pence, you were in the front row in a Rose Garden event 11 days ago at what seems to have been a super spreader event for senior administration and congressional officials. No social distancing, few masks, and now a cluster of coronavirus cases among those who were there. How can you expect Americans to follow the administration's safety guidelines to protect themselves from COVID when you at the White House have not been doing so?
Well, the American people have demonstrated over the last 8 months that when given the facts, they're willing to put the health of their families and their neighbors and people they don't even know first. And President Trump and I have great confidence in the American people and their ability to take that information and put it into practice. In the height of the epidemic, when we were losing a heartbreaking number of 2,500 Americans a day, we surged resources to New Jersey and New York and New Orleans and Detroit. We told the American people what needed to be done, and the American people made the sacrifices. When the outbreak in the Sun Belt happened this summer, again, Americans stepped forward. But the reality is the work of the President of the United States goes on. A vacancy on the Supreme Court of the United States has come upon us, and the President introduced Judge Amy Coney Barrett.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice President.
At that, if I may say, that Rose Garden event, there's been a great deal of speculation about it. My wife Karen and I were there and honored to be there. Many of the people who were at that event, Susan, actually were tested for coronavirus, and it was an outdoor event, which all of our scientists regularly and routinely advise. The difference here is President Trump and I trust the American people to make choices in the best interest of their health. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris consistently talk about mandates, and not just mandates with the coronavirus, but a government takeover of health care, the Green New Deal, all government control. We're about freedom and respecting the freedom of the American people.
Let's talk about respecting the American people. You respect the American people when you tell them the truth. You respect the American people when you have the courage
Which we've
to be a
always
leader
done.
speaking of those things that you may not want people to hear, but they need to hear so they can protect themselves. But this administration stood on information that if you had as a parent, if you had as a worker knowing you didn't have enough money saved up, and now you're standing in a food line because of the ineptitude of an administration that was unwilling to speak the truth to the American people. So let's talk about caring about the American people. The American people have had to sacrifice far too much because of the incompetence of this administration. It is asking too much of the people.
Susan, we talked about
It is asking too much of the people. That they would not be equipped with the information they need to help themselves to protect
Susan,
their parents and
No,
their
I'm
children.
sorry. Kamala Harris, Senator Harris, I'm sorry.
It's fine, I'm Kamala.
No, you're Senator Harris to me. For life to get back to normal, Dr. Anthony Fauci and other experts say that most of the people who can be vaccinated need to be vaccinated. But half of Americans now say they wouldn't take a vaccine if it was released now. If the Trump administration approves a vaccine before or after the election, should Americans take it, and would you take it?
If the public health professionals, if Dr. Fauci, if the doctors tell us that we should take it, I'll be the first in line to take it, absolutely. But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
Vice President Pence, there have been a lot of repercussions from this pandemic. In recent days, the president's diagnosis of COVID-19 has underscored the importance of the job that you hold and that you are seeking. That's our second topic tonight. It's the role of the vice president. One of you will make history on January 20th. You will be the vice president to the oldest president the United States has ever had. Donald Trump will be 74 years old on Inauguration Day. Joe Biden will be 78 years old. That already has raised concerns among some voters, concerns that have been sharpened by President Trump's hospitalization in recent days. Vice President Pence, have you had a conversation or reached an agreement with President Trump about safeguards or procedures when it comes to the issue of presidential disability? And if not, do you think you should? You have 2 minutes without interruption.
Well, Susan, thank you, although I would like to go back.
I think we need to move on to the issue
Well, thank you, but I would like to go back because the reality is that we're going to have a vaccine, Senator, in record time, in unheard of time, in less than a year. We have 5 companies in phase 3 clinical trials, and we're right now producing tens of millions of doses. So the fact that you continue to undermine public confidence in a vaccine, if the vaccine emerges during the Trump administration, I think is unconscionable. And Senator, I just ask you, stop playing politics with people's lives. The reality is that we will have a vaccine, we believe, before the end of this year. And it will have the capacity to save countless American lives. And your continuous undermining of confidence in a vaccine is it's just unacceptable. And let me also say, you know, the reality is when you talk about failure in this administration, we actually do know what failure looks like in a pandemic. It was 2009. The swine flu arrived in the United States. Thankfully, it ended up not being as lethal as the coronavirus. But before the end of the year, when Joe Biden was vice president of the United States, not 7.5 million people contracted the swine flu, 60 million Americans contracted the swine flu. If the swine flu had been as lethal as the coronavirus, in 2009, when Joe Biden was vice president, we would have lost 2 million American lives. His own chief of staff, Ron Klain, would say last year that it was pure luck that they did, quote, everything possible wrong. And we learned from that. They left the strategic national stockpile empty. They left an empty and hollow plan, but we still learned from it. And I think the American people, I'm going to say again, can be proud of what we have done. And Senator, please stop undermining confidence in a vaccine.
Senator Harris, let me ask you the same question that I asked Vice President Pence, which is, have you had a conversation or reached an agreement with Vice President Biden about safeguards or procedures when it comes to the issue of presidential disability? And if not, And if you win the election next month, do you think you should? You have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
So let me tell you, first of all, the day I got the call from Joe Biden, it was actually a Zoom call, asking me to serve with him on this ticket was probably one of the most memorable days of my life. I thought about my mother, who came to the United States at the age of 19, gave birth to me at the age of 25 at Kaiser Hospital in Oakland, California. And the thought that I'd be sitting here right now, I know would make her proud, and she must be looking down on this. Joe and I were raised in a very similar way. We were raised with values that are about hard work, about the value and the dignity of public service, and about the importance of fighting for the dignity of all people. And I think Joe asked me to serve with him because, I have a career that included being elected the first woman district attorney of San Francisco, where I created models of innovation for law enforcement in terms of reform of the criminal justice system. I was elected the first woman of color and black woman to be elected Attorney General of the state of California, where I ran the second largest Department of Justice in the United States, second only to the United States Department of Justice. And there I took on everything from transnational criminal organizations to the big banks that were taking advantage of homeowners, to for-profit colleges that were taking advantage of veterans. And then, of course, now I serve in the United States Senate as only the second black woman ever elected to the United States Senate. I serve on the Senate Intelligence Committee, where I've been in regular receipt of classified information about threats to our nation and hotspots around the world. I've traveled the world. I've met with our soldiers in war zones. And I think Joe has asked me to serve with him because he knows that we share a purpose which is about lifting up the American people. And after the 4 years that we have seen of Donald Trump unifying our country around our common values and principles.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Neither President Trump nor Vice President Biden has released a sort of detailed health information that had become the modern norm until the 2016 election. And in recent days, President Trump's doctors have given misleading answers or refused to answer basic questions about his health. And my question to each of you in turn is this information voters deserve to know? Vice President Pence, would you like to go first?
Well, Susan, thank you. And let me say, on behalf of the President and the First Lady, how moved we've all been by the outpouring of prayers and concern for the President. And I do believe it's emblematic of the prayers and the concern that have ushered forth for every American impacted by the coronavirus. But the care the President received at Walter Reed Hospital, the White House doctors, was exceptional. And the transparency that they practiced all along the way will continue. The American people have a right to know about the health and well-being of their President, and will continue to do that. But I'm just extremely grateful and was more than a little moved by the broad and bipartisan support. And Senator, I want to thank you and Joe Biden for your expressions of genuine concern. And I also want to congratulate you, as I did on that phone call, on the historic nature of your nomination.
Thank you.
I never expected to be on this stage 4 years ago, so I know the feeling. But the reality is we've got an election before the American people in the midst of this challenging year. And the stakes have never been higher, but I think the choice has never been clearer.
I want to give Senator Harris a chance to respond to the same question I asked, which is, do voters have a right to know more detailed health information about presidential candidates and especially about presidents, especially when they're facing some kind of challenge?
Absolutely, and that's why Joe Biden has been so incredibly transparent, and certainly by contrast, the president has not, both in terms of health records, but also let's look at taxes. We now know, because of great investigative journalism, that Donald Trump paid $750 in taxes. When I first heard about it, I literally said, "You mean $750,000? And it was like, no, $750. We now know Donald Trump owes and is in debt for $400 million. And just so everyone is clear, when we say in debt, it means you owe money to somebody. And it'd be really good to know who the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, owes money to, because the American people have a right to know what is influencing the president's decisions. And is he making those decisions on the best interest of the American people, of you, or self-interest? So, Susan, I'm glad you asked about transparency, because it has to be across the board. Joe has been incredibly transparent over many, many years. The one thing we all know about Joe, he puts it all out there. He is honest, he is forthright. But Donald Trump, on the other hand, has been about covering up everything.
Thank you, Senator Harris. I want to give you a chance to respond, Vice President.
Well, look, I respect the fact that Joe Biden spent 47 years in public life. I respect your public service as well.
Thank you.
But the American people have a president who's a businessman, he's a job creator, who's paid tens of millions of dollars in taxes, payroll taxes, property taxes. He's created tens of thousands of American jobs. And the president said those public reports are not accurate. And the president's also released literally stacks of financial disclosures the American people can review just as the law allows. But the distinction here is that Joe Biden, 47 years in public service, compared to President Donald Trump, who brought all of that experience 4 years ago.
Thank you, Vice
and
President.
turned this economy around by cutting taxes, rolling back regulation, unleashing American energy, fighting for free and fair trade, and all of that's on the line if Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
You know, that's a good segue into our third topic, which is about the economy. This has been another aspect of life for Americans that's been so affected by this coronavirus. We have a jobs crisis brewing. On Friday, we learned that the unemployment rate had declined to 7.9% in September, but the job growth had stalled, and that was before the latest round of layoffs and furloughs in the airline industry at Disney and elsewhere. Hundreds of thousands of discouraged workers have stopped looking for work. Nearly 11 million jobs that existed at the beginning of the year haven't been replaced. Those hardest hit include Latinos, Blacks, and women. Senator Harris, the Biden-Harris campaign has proposed new programs to boost the economy, and you would pay for that new spending by raising $4 trillion in taxes on wealthy individuals and corporations. Some economists warn that could curb entrepreneurial ventures that fuel growth and create jobs. Would raising taxes put the recovery at risk? And you have 2 minutes to answer uninterrupted.
Thank you. On the issue of the economy, I think there couldn't be a more fundamental difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Joe Biden believes you measure the health and the strength of America's economy based on the health and the strength of the American worker and the American family. On the other hand, you have Donald Trump, who measures the strength of the economy based on how rich people are doing, which is why he passed a tax bill benefiting the top 1% and the biggest corporations of America, leading to a $2 trillion deficit that the American people are going to have to pay for. On day one, Joe Biden will repeal that tax bill. He'll get rid of it. And what he'll do with the money is invest it in the American people. And through a plan that is about investing in infrastructure, something that Donald Trump said he would do. I remember hearing about some infrastructure week. I don't think it ever happened. But Joe Biden will do that. He'll invest in infrastructure. It's about upgrading our roads and bridges, but also investing in clean energy and renewable energy. Joe is going to invest that money in what we need to do around innovation. There was a time when our country believed in science and invested in research and development so that we were an innovation leader on the globe. Joe Biden will use that money to invest in education. So, for example, for folks who want to go to a 2-year community college, it will be free. If you come from a family that makes less than $125,000, you'll go to a public university for free. And across the board, we'll make sure that if you have student loan debt, it's cut by $10,000. That's how Joe Biden thinks about the economy, which is it's about investing in the people of our country, as opposed to passing a tax bill, which had the benefit of letting American corporations go offshore to do their business.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Vice President Pence, your administration has been predicting a rapid and robust recovery, but the latest economic report suggests that's not happening. Should Americans be braced for an economic comeback that is going to take not months, but a year or more? You have 2 minutes to answer uninterrupted.
When President Trump and I took office, America had gone through the slowest economic recovery since the Great Depression. Because when Joe Biden was vice president, they tried to tax and spend and regulate and bail our way back to a growing economy. President Trump cut taxes across the board. Despite what Senator Harris says, the average American family of four had $2,000 in savings in taxes. And with the rise in wages that occurred, most predominantly for blue-collar, hardworking Americans, the average household income for a family of four increased by $4,000 following President Trump's tax cuts. But America, you just heard Senator Harris tell you, on day one, Joe Biden's going to raise your taxes. It's really remarkable to think, Susan. I mean, right after a time where we're going through a pandemic that lost 22 million jobs at the height, we've already added back 11.6 million jobs because we had a president who cut taxes, rolled back regulation, unleashed American energy, fought for free and fair trade, and secured $4 trillion from the Congress of the United States to give direct payments to families, save 50 million jobs through the Paycheck Protection Program. We literally have spared no expense to help the American people and the American worker through this. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris want to raise taxes. They want to bury our economy under a $2 trillion Green New Deal, which you were one of the original co-sponsors of in the United States Senate. They want to abolish fossil fuels and ban fracking, which would cost hundreds of thousands of American jobs all across the heartland. And Joe Biden wants to go back to the economic surrender to China, that when we took office, half of our international trade deficit was with China alone. And Joe Biden wants to repeal all of the tariffs that President Trump put into effect to fight for American jobs and American workers. Joe Biden says democracy's on the ballot. Make no mistake about it, Susan. The American economy, the American comeback is on the ballot with 4 more years of growth and opportunity, 4 more years of President Donald Trump. 2021 is going to be the biggest economic year in the history of this country.
Thank you, Vice President Pence. Senator Harris.
Well, I mean, I thought we saw enough of it in last week's debate, but I think this is supposed to be a debate based on fact and truth. And the truth and the fact is Joe Biden has been very clear. He will not raise taxes on anybody who makes less than $400,000 a year.
He said he's going to repeal the Trump tax cuts.
Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking.
Well,
I'm speaking.
It'd be important if you said the truth. Joe Biden said twice in the debate last week that he's going to repeal the Trump tax cuts. That was tax cuts that gave the average working family $2,000 in a tax break every single year. Senator,
that is absolutely not true. That
is he only going to repeal part of the Trump tax cuts?
If you don't mind letting me finish, we can then have a conversation, okay?
Please.
Okay. Joe Biden will not raise taxes on anyone who makes less than $400,000 a year. He has been very clear about that. Joe Biden will not end fracking. He has been very clear about that. Joe Biden is the one who, during the Great Recession, was responsible for the Recovery Act that brought America back. And now the Trump-Pence administration wants to take credit when they rode the coattails of Joe Biden's success for the economy that they had at the beginning of their term. Of course, now the economy is a complete disaster. But Joe Biden, on the one hand, did that. On the other hand, you have Donald Trump, who has reigned over a recession that is being compared to the Great Depression. On the one hand, you have Joe Biden, who was responsible with President Barack Obama for the Affordable Care Act, which brought health care to over 20 million Americans and protected people with pre-existing conditions. And what it also did is it saved those families who otherwise were going bankrupt because of hospital bills they could not afford. On the other hand, you have Donald Trump, who's in court right now, trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, which means that you will lose protections if you have pre-existing conditions. And this is very important, Susan.
Yes,
and it's important.
We need to give Vice President.
I'd just like to, he interrupted me, and I'd like to just finish, please. If you have a pre-existing condition, heart disease, diabetes, breast cancer, they're coming for you. If you love someone who has a pre-existing condition, they're coming for you. If you are under the age of 26 on your parents' coverage, they're coming for you.
Senator Harris, thank you.
You're welcome.
Let me give you a chance to respond.
Well, I hope we have a chance to talk about health care because Obamacare was a disaster. The American people remember it well. And President Trump and I have a plan to improve health care and to protect pre-existing conditions for every American. But look, Senator Harris, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. You yourself said on multiple occasions when you were running for president that you would ban fracking. Joe Biden looked at a supporter in the eye and pointed and said, I guarantee that we will abolish fossil fuels. They have a $2 trillion version of the Green New Deal, Susan, that your newspaper, USA Today, said really wasn't that very different from the original Green New Deal. More taxes, more regulation, banning fracking, abolishing fossil fuel, crushing American energy, and economic surrender to China is a prescription for economic decline. President Trump and I will keep America growing. The V-shaped recovery that's underway right now will continue with 4 more years of President Donald Trump.
Thank you very, very much, Vice President Pence. Once again, you've provided the perfect segue to a new topic, which is climate change. And Vice President Pence, I'd like to pose the first question to you. This year, we've seen record-setting hurricanes in the South. Another one, Hurricane Delta, is now threatening the Gulf. And we have seen record-setting wildfires in the West. Do you believe, as the scientific community has concluded, that man-made climate change has made wildfires bigger, hotter, and more deadly, and have made hurricanes wetter, slower, and more damaging? You have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
Thank you, Susan. Well, first, I'm very proud of our record on the environment and on conservation. According to all of the best estimates, our air and land are cleaner than any time ever recorded. Our water is among the cleanest in the world. And just a little while ago, the President signed the Outdoors Act. It's the largest investment in our public lands and public parks in 100 years. So President Trump has made a commitment to conservation and to the environment. Now, with regard to climate change, the climate is changing. But the issue is, what's the cause and what do we do about it? President Trump has made it clear that we're going to continue to listen to the science. Now, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris would put us back in the Paris Climate Accord. They'd impose the Green New Deal, which would crush American energy, would increase the energy costs of American families in their homes, and literally would crush American jobs. And President Trump and I believe that the progress that we have made in a cleaner environment has been happening precisely because we have a strong free market economy. You know, what's remarkable is the United States has reduced CO2 more than the countries that are still in the Paris Climate Accord, but we've done it through innovation. And we've done it through natural gas and fracking, which, Senator, the American people can go look at the record. I know Joe Biden says otherwise now, as you do, but the both of you repeatedly committed to abolishing fossil fuel and banning fracking. And so by creating the kind of American innovation, we're actually steering toward a stronger and better environment. With regard to wildfires, President Trump and I believe that forest management has to be front and center, and even Governor Gavin Newsom from your state has agreed we've got to work on forest management. And with regard to hurricanes, the National Oceanic Administration tells us that actually as difficult as they are,
Thank you, Vice President.
There are no more hurricanes today than there were 100 years ago.
Thank you.
But many of the climate alarmists use hurricanes and wildfires to try and sell their bill of goods of a Green New Deal. And President Trump and I are going to always put American jobs and American workers first.
Senator Harris, as the Vice President mentioned, you co-sponsored the Green New Deal in Congress. But Vice President Biden said in last week's debate that he does not support the Green New Deal. But if you look at the Biden-Harris campaign website, it describes the Green New Deal as a crucial framework. What exactly would be the stance of a Biden-Harris administration toward the Green New Deal? You have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
Sure. So first of all, I will repeat, and the American people know, that Joe Biden will not ban fracking. That is a fact. That is a fact. I will repeat that Joe Biden has been very clear that he thinks about growing jobs, which is why he will not increase taxes for anyone who makes less than $400,000 a year. Joe Biden's economic plan, Moody's, which is a reputable Wall Street firm, has said will create 7 million more jobs than Donald Trump's. And part of those jobs that will be created by Joe Biden are going to be about clean energy and renewable energy. Because you see, Joe understands that the west coast of our country is burning, including my home state of California. Joe sees what is happening on the Gulf states, which are being battered by storms. Joe has seen and talked with the farmers in Iowa, whose entire crops have been destroyed because of floods. And so Joe believes, again, in science. I'll tell you something, Susan. I served, when I first got to the Senate, on the committee that's responsible for the environment. Do you know this administration took the word science off the website and then took the phrase climate change off the website? We have seen a pattern with this administration, which is they don't believe in science. And Joe's plan is about saying we're going to deal with it, but we're also going to create jobs. Donald Trump, when asked about the wildfires in California, and the question was, you know, the science is telling us this, you know what Donald Trump said? Science doesn't know. So let's talk about who is prepared to lead our country over the course of the next 4 years on what is an existential threat to us as human beings. Joe is about saying we're going to invest that in renewable energy. It's going to be about the creation of millions of jobs. We will achieve net zero emissions by 2050, carbon neutral by 2035. Joe has a plan. This has been a lot of talk from the Trump administration, and really it has been to go backward instead of forward. We will also re-enter the climate agreement with pride.
Senator Harris just said that climate change is an existential threat. Vice President Pence, do you believe that climate change poses an existential threat?
As I said, Susan, the climate is changing. We'll follow the science. But once again, Senator Harris is denying the fact that they're going to raise taxes on every American. Joe Biden said twice in the debate last week that on day one he was going to repeal the Trump tax cuts. Those tax cuts delivered $2,000 in tax relief to the average family of four across America. And with regard to banning fracking, I just recommend that people look at the record. You yourself said repeatedly that you would ban fracking. You were the first Senate co-sponsor of the Green New Deal. And while Joe Biden denied the Green New Deal, Susan, thank you for pointing out, the Green New Deal is on their campaign website. And as USA Today said, it's essentially the same plan as you co-sponsored with AOC when she submitted it in the Senate. And you just heard the senator say that she's going to resubmit America to the Paris Climate Accord. Look, the American people have always cherished our environment. We'll continue to cherish it. We've made great progress reducing CO2 emissions through American innovation and the development of natural gas through fracking. We don't need a massive $2 trillion Green New Deal that would impose all new mandates on American businesses and American families.
Thank you.
Joe Biden wants us to retrofit 4 million American business buildings. It makes no sense. It will cost jobs. President Trump is going to put America first. He's going to put jobs first, and we're going to take care of our environment and follow the science.
Thank you, Vice President. On the issue of jobs,
Senator Harris,
let's talk about that. The Vice President earlier referred to, as part of what he thinks is an accomplishment, the President's trade war with China. You lost that trade war. You lost it. What ended up happening is because of a so-called trade war with China, America lost 300,000 manufacturing jobs. Farmers have experienced bankruptcy because of it. We are in a manufacturing recession because of it. And when we look at where this administration has been, there are estimates that by the end of the term of this administration, they will have lost more jobs than almost any other presidential administration. And the American people know what I'm talking about. You know, I think about 20-year-olds. You know, we have a 20-year-old, a 20-something-year-old, who are coming out of high school and college right now, and you're wondering, is there going to be a job there for me? We're looking at people who are trying to figure out how they're going to pay rent by the end of the month. Almost half of American renters are worried about whether they're going to be able to pay rent by the end of the month. This is where the economy is in America right now, and it is because of the catastrophe and the failure of leadership of this administration.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Vice President Pence, let me give you just 15 seconds to respond, because then I want to move on to
I'd love to respond. Look, lost the trade war with China, Joe Biden never fought it. Joe Biden has been a cheerleader for communist China over the last several decades. And again, Senator Harris, you're entitled to your opinion. You're not entitled to your own facts. When Joe Biden was vice president, we lost 200,000 manufacturing jobs, and President Obama said they were never coming back. He said we needed a magic wand to bring them back. In our first 3 years after we cut taxes, rolled back regulation, unleashed American energy, this administration saw 500,000 manufacturing jobs created. And that's exactly the kind of growth we're going to continue to see as we bring our nation through this pandemic. But a Green New Deal, your massive new mandates, your Paris Climate Accord, it's going to kill jobs this time, just like it killed jobs.
I just need to respond very briefly.
15 seconds, and
Thank
then we'll move on.
Thank you. Joe Biden is responsible for saving America's auto industry, and you voted against it. So let's set the record straight. Thank you.
I'd like to talk about China. We have, as our next topic, we have no more complicated or consequential foreign relationship than the one with China. It is a huge market for American agricultural goods. It's a potential partner in dealing with climate change in North Korea. And in a video tonight, President Trump again blamed it for the coronavirus, saying China will pay. Vice President Pence, how would you describe our fundamental relationship with China? Competitors, adversaries, enemies? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Susan. Well, before I leave that, let me speak to voting records if I can. You know, everybody knows that NAFTA cost literally thousands of American factories to close. We saw automotive jobs go south of the border. President Trump fought to renegotiate NAFTA. And the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement is now the law of the land. American people deserve to know Senator Kamala Harris was one of only 10 members of the Senate to vote against the USMCA. It was a huge win for American auto workers. It was a huge win for American farmers, especially dairy in the upper Midwest. But Senator, you said it didn't go far enough on climate change, that you put your radical environmental agenda ahead of American auto workers and ahead of American jobs. The American people deserve to know that. Is probably why Newsweek magazine said that Kamala Harris was the most liberal member of the United States Senate in 2019, more liberal than Bernie Sanders, more liberal than any of the others in the United States Senate. So now, with regard to China, look, Susan, first and foremost, China is to blame for the coronavirus. And President Trump is not happy about it. He's made that very clear, made it clear again today. China and the World Health Organization did not play straight with the American people. They did not let our personnel into China to get information on the coronavirus until the middle of February. Fortunately, President Trump, in dealing with China from the outset of this administration, standing up to China that had been taking advantage of America for decades in the wake of Joe Biden's cheerleading for China, President Trump made that decision before the end of January to suspend all travel from China. And again, the American people deserve to know Joe Biden opposed President Trump's decision to suspend all travel from China. He said it was hysterical. He said it was xenophobic.
Vice President Pence.
But President Trump has stood up to China. We're going to continue to stand strong.
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
We want to improve the relationship, but we're going to level the playing field, and we're going to hold China accountable for what they did to America with the coronavirus.
Thank you. Senator Harris, let me ask you the same question that I asked the Vice President. How would you describe our fundamental relationship with China? Are we competitors, adversaries, enemies? You'll have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
Susan, the Trump administration's perspective and approach to China has resulted in the loss of American lives, American jobs, and America's standing. There's a weird obsession that President Trump has had with getting rid of whatever accomplishment was achieved by President Obama and Vice President Biden. For example, they created within the White House an office that basically was responsible for monitoring pandemics. They got rid of it.
Not true.
There was a team of disease experts that President Obama and Vice President Biden dispatched to China to monitor what is now predictable and what might happen. They pulled them out. We now are looking at 210,000 Americans who have lost their lives. Let's look at the job situation. We mentioned before the trade deal, the trade war, they wanted to call it, with China. It resulted in the loss of over 300 manufacturing jobs and a manufacturing recession, and the American consumer paying thousands of dollars more for goods because of that failed war that they called it. Then let's talk about standing. Pew, a reputable research firm, has done an analysis that shows that leaders of all of our formerly allied countries have now decided that they hold in greater esteem and respect Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party, than they do Donald Trump, the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief of the United States. This is where we are today because of a failure of leadership by this administration.
Senator Harris, we've seen changes in the role of the United States in terms of global leadership over the past 4 years. And of course, times do change. What's your definition? We've seen strains with China, of course, as the Vice President mentioned. We've seen strains with our traditional allies in NATO and elsewhere. What is your definition of the role of American leadership in 2020?
So, you know, Joe is, I love talking with Joe about a lot of these issues. And, you know, Joe, I think he said it quite well. He says, you know, foreign policy, it might sound complicated, but really it's relationships. So just think about it as relationships. And so we know this in our personal and professional relationships. You got to keep your word to your friends. Got to be loyal to your friends. People who've stood with you, got to stand with them. You got to know who your adversaries are and keep them in check. But what we have seen with Donald Trump is that he has betrayed our friends and embraced dictators around the world. Let's take, for example, Russia. So, Russia, I serve on the Intelligence Committee of the United States Senate. America's intelligence community told us Russia interfered in the election of the President of the United States in 2016 and is playing in 2020. Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, said the same. But Donald Trump, the Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America, prefers to take the word of Vladimir Putin over the word of the American intelligence community. You look at our friends at NATO. He has walked away from agreements. You can look at the Iran nuclear deal, which now has put us in a position where we are less safe because they are building up what might end up being a significant nuclear arsenal. We were in that deal, guys. We were in the Iran nuclear deal with friends, with allies around the country. And because of Donald Trump's unilateral approach to foreign policy, coupled with his isolationism, he pulled us out and has made America less safe. So, Susan, it's about relationships. And the thing that has always been part of the strength of our nation, in addition to our great military, has been that we keep our word. But Donald Trump doesn't understand that because he doesn't understand what it means to be honest.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Vice President Pence, let me give you a chance to respond.
Well, thank you. Well, President Trump kept his word when we moved the American embassy to Jerusalem, the capital of the state of Israel. When Joe Biden was vice president, they promised to do that, and they never did. We've stood strong with our allies, but we've been demanding. NATO is now contributing more to our common defense than ever before, thanks to President Trump's leadership. We've strengthened our alliances across the Asia-Pacific, and we've stood strong against those who would do us harm. You know, when President Trump came into office, ISIS had captured an area of the Middle East the size of Pennsylvania. But President Trump unleashed the American military, and our armed forces destroyed the ISIS caliphate and took down their leader, al-Baghdadi, without one American casualty. Al-Baghdadi was responsible for the death of thousands. But notably, America's hearts today are with the family of Kayla Mueller, her parents of which are here with us tonight in Salt Lake City. Today, 2 of the ISIS killers responsible for Kayla Mueller's murder were brought to justice in the United States. Jihadi John was killed on the battlefield along with the other Beatle. The reality is that when Joe Biden was vice president, we had an opportunity to save Kayla Miller. It breaks my heart to reflect on it, but the military came into the Oval Office, presented a plan. They said they knew where Kayla was. Baghdadi had held her for 18 months, abused her mercilessly before they killed her. But when Joe Biden was vice president, they hesitated for a month. And when armed forces finally went in, it was clear she'd been moved 2 days earlier. And her family says with a heart that broke the heart of every American that if President Donald Trump had been president, they believe Kayla would be alive today.
Thank you, Vice President.
Look, we destroyed the ISIS caliphate. And you talk about re-entering the Iran nuclear deal. I mean, the last administration transferred $1.8 billion to the leading state sponsor of terrorism. President Donald Trump got us out of the deal.
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
And when Qasem Soleimani was traveling to Baghdad to do harm to Americans, President Donald Trump took him out.
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
And America is safer, our allies are safer, and the American people know President Donald Trump will never
Thank you, Vice President
take
Pence.
action.
I would like to give Senator Harris a chance to respond, but not at such great length, because, of course, there are other topics we want to talk about.
But I would like equal time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
First of all, to the Mueller family, I know about your daughter's case, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. What happened to her is awful, and it should have never happened. And I know Joe feels the same way. And I know that President Obama feels the same way. But you mentioned Soleimani. Let's start there. So after the strike on Soleimani, there was a counter strike on our troops in Iraq. And they suffered serious brain injuries. And do you know what Donald Trump dismissed them as? Headaches. And this is about a pattern of Donald Trump's, where he has referred to our men who are serving in our military as suckers and losers. Donald Trump, who went to Arlington Cemetery and stood above the graves of our fallen heroes and said, what's in it for them? Because, of course, you know, he only thinks about what's in it for him. Let's take what he said about John McCain, a great American hero. And Donald Trump says he doesn't deserve to be called a hero because he was a prisoner of war. And this is very important when you want to talk about who is the current commander-in-chief and what they care about and what they don't care about. Public reporting that Russia had bounties on the heads of American soldiers. And you know what a bounty is? It's somebody puts a price on your head and they will pay it if you are killed. And Donald Trump had talked at least 6 times to Vladimir Putin and never brought up the subject. Joe Biden would never do that.
Thank you.
Joe Biden would, but Joe Biden would hold Russia to account for any threat to our nation's security or to our troops who are sacrificing their lives for the sake of our democracy and our safety.
Thank you, Senator Harris. This is such an important issue, but we have other important issues as well. And Susan, I want to make sure we have a chance
I really have
to talk
to respond
about,
to that. Look, she has
15 seconds because
well, I got to have
trying
more
to
than
keep,
that. Look,
well, I'm sorry, but Vice President Pence, you've had more time than she's had so far.
The slanders against President Donald Trump regarding men and women of our armed forces are absurd.
I'm sorry, Vice President Pence.
My son is a captain in the United States Marine Corps. My son-in-law is deployed in the United States Navy. I can assure all of you, with sons and daughters serving in our military, President Donald Trump not only respects but reveres all of those who serve in our armed forces, and any suggestion otherwise is ridiculous.
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
The American people deserve, Susan, the American people deserve to know.
Vice President Pence, I did not, excuse me,
Susan,
I did not create the rules for tonight.
Joe Biden.
Your campaigns agreed to the rules for tonight's debate with the Commission on Presidential Debates. I'm here to enforce them, which involves moving from one topic to another, giving roughly equal time to both of you, which is what I'm trying very hard to do.
Go right ahead.
So I want to go ahead and move to the next topic, which is an important one, as the last topic was, and that is the Supreme Court. On Monday, the Senate Judiciary Committee is scheduled to open hearings on Amy Coney Barrett's nomination to the Supreme Court. Senator Harris, you'll be there as a member of the committee. Yes. Her confirmation would cement the court's conservative majority and make it likely open to more abortion restrictions, even to overturning the landmark Roe v. Wade ruling. Access to abortion would then be up to the states. Vice President Pence, you're the former governor of Indiana. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, what would you want Indiana to do? Would you want your home state to ban all abortions? You have 2 minutes, uninterrupted.
Well, thank you for the question, but I'll use a little bit of my time to respond to that very important issue before. The American people deserve to know Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general, was responsible for the death of hundreds of American service members. When the opportunity came, we saw him headed to Baghdad to kill more Americans. President Trump didn't hesitate, and Qasem Soleimani is gone. But you deserve to know that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris actually criticized the decision to take out Qasem Soleimani. It's really inexplicable, but with regard to Joe Biden, it's explainable, because history records that Joe Biden actually opposed the raid against Osama bin Laden. It's absolutely essential that we have a commander-in-chief who will not hesitate to act to protect American lives and to protect American service members, and that's what you have in President Donald Trump. Now, with regard to the Supreme Court of the United States, let me say President Trump and I could not be more enthusiastic about the opportunity to see Judge Amy Coney Barrett become Justice Amy Coney Barrett. Now, she's a brilliant woman, and she will bring a lifetime of experience and a sizable American family to the Supreme Court of the United States. And our hope is, in the hearing next week, unlike Justice Kavanaugh received with treatment from you and others, we hope she gets a fair hearing. And we particularly hope that we don't see the kind of attacks on her Christian faith that we saw before. I mean, the Democrat chairman of the Judiciary Committee before, when Judge Barrett was being confirmed for the Court of Appeals, expressed concern that the dogma of her faith lived loudly in her. Dick Durbin of Illinois said that it was a concern. Senator, I know one of our judicial nominees, you actually attacked because they were a member of the Catholic Knights of Columbus, just because the Knights of Columbus holds pro-life views and pro-marriage views.
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
So
your time
my hope is that when the hearing takes place,
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
that Judge Amy Coney Barrett will be respected,
Thank you,
treated
Vice President
respectfully,
Pence.
voted and confirmed
Thank
to the
you.
Supreme Court of the United States.
Senator Harris, you're the senator from and former Attorney General of California. So let me ask you a parallel question to the one I posed to the Vice President. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, what would you want California to do? Would you want your home state to enact no restrictions on access to abortion? And you have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
Thank you, Susan. First of all, Joe Biden and I are both people of faith, and it's insulting to suggest that we would knock anyone for their faith. And in fact, Joe, if elected, will be only the second practicing Catholic as President of the United States. On the issue of this nomination, Joe and I are very clear, as are the majority of the American people. We are 27 days before the decision about who will be the next president of the United States. And, you know, before, when this conversation has come up, you know, it's been about election year or election time. We're literally in an election. Over 4 million people have voted. People are in the process of voting right now. And so Joe has been very clear, as the American people are. Let the American people fill that seat in the White House, and then we'll fill that seat on the United States Supreme Court. And to your point, Susan, the issues before us couldn't be more serious. There's the issue of choice, and I will always fight for a woman's right to make a decision about her own body. It should be her decision and not that of Donald Trump and the Vice President, Michael Pence. But let's also look at what else is before the court. It's the Affordable Care Act. Like, literally in the midst of a public health pandemic, when over 210,000 people have died and 7 million people probably have what will be in the future considered a pre-existing condition because you contracted the virus. Donald Trump is in court right now trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. And I said it before, and it bears repeating. This means that there will be no more protections if they win for people with pre-existing conditions. This means that over 20 million people will lose your coverage. It means that if you're under the age of 26, you can't stay on your parents' coverage anymore. And here's the thing. The contrast couldn't be more clear. They're trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. Joe Biden is saying, let's expand coverage. Let's give you a choice of a public option or private coverage. Let's bring down premiums.
Thank you, Senator
Let's
Harris.
lower Medicare eligibility to 60.
Thank you, Senator.
That's true
Harris.
leadership.
You know, you mentioned earlier, Vice President Pence, that the president was committed to maintaining protections for people with pre-existing conditions. But you do have this court case that you are supporting, your administration supporting, that would strike down the Affordable Care Act. The president says, President Trump says that he's going to protect people with pre-existing conditions, but he has not explained how he would do that. And that was one of the toughest nuts to crack when they were passing the Affordable Care Act. So tell us specifically, how would your administration protect Americans with pre-existing conditions to have access to affordable insurance if the Affordable Care Act is struck down?
Well, thank you, Susan. But let me just say, addressing your very first question, I couldn't be more proud to serve as vice president to a president who stands without apology for the sanctity of human life. I'm pro-life. I don't apologize for it. And this is another one of those cases where there's such a dramatic contrast. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris support taxpayer funding of abortion all the way up to the moment of birth. Late-term abortion. They want to increase funding to Planned Parenthood of America. Now, for our part, I would never presume how Judge Amy Coney Barrett would rule on the Supreme Court of the United States, but we'll continue to stand strong for the right to life. When you speak about the Supreme Court, though, I think the American people really deserve an answer, Senator Harris. Are you and Joe Biden going to pack the court if Judge Amy Coney Barrett is confirmed? I mean, there have been 29 vacancies on the Supreme Court during presidential election years, from George Washington to Barack Obama. Presidents have nominated in all 29 cases. But your party is actually openly advocating adding seats to the Supreme Court, which has had 9 seats for 150 years, if you don't get your way. This is a classic case of if you can't win by the rules, you're going to change the rules. Now, you've refused to answer the question. Joe Biden has refused to answer the question. So I think the American people would really like to know, if Judge Amy Coney Barrett is confirmed to the Supreme Court of the United States, are you and Joe Biden, if somehow you win this election, going to pack the Supreme Court to get your way?
I'm so glad we went through a little history lesson. Let's do that a little more. In 1864...
Well, I'd like you to answer the question.
No, Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking. I'm speaking. Okay. In 1864, one of the, I think, political heroes, certainly of the president, I assume of you also, Mr. Vice President, is Abraham Lincoln. Mm-hmm. Abraham Lincoln was up for re-election, and it was 27 days before the election, and a seat became open on the United States Supreme Court. Abraham Lincoln's party was in charge not only of the White House, but the Senate. But Honest Abe said it's not the right thing to do. The American people deserve to make the decision about who will be the next president of the United States, and then that person can select who will serve for a lifetime on the highest court of our land. And so Joe and I are very clear. The American people are voting right now, and it should be their decision about who will serve on this most important body for a lifetime.
Thank you, Senator Harris.
People, Susan, are voting right now. They'd like to know if you and Joe Biden are going to pack the Supreme Court if you don't get your way in this nomination.
Let's talk about packing.
You once again gave a non-answer. Joe Biden gave a non-answer.
I'm trying to answer you now.
The American people deserve a straight answer. And if you haven't figured it out yet, the straight answer is they are going to pack the Supreme Court if they somehow win this election. Men and women, I got to tell you, people across this country, if you cherish our Supreme Court, if you cherish the separation of powers, you need to reject the Biden-Harris ticket. Come November the 3rd, re-elect President Donald Trump, and we'll stand by that separation of powers in a 9-seat Supreme Court.
Yeah, let's talk about packing the court then. Let's talk about the fact. Yeah, I'm about to. So the Trump-Pence administration has been, because I sit on the Senate Judiciary Committee, Susan, as you mentioned, and I've witnessed the appointments for lifetime appointments to the federal courts, district courts, courts of appeal. People who are purely ideological, people who have been reviewed by legal professional organizations and found to have been not competent, are substandard. And do you know that of the 50 people who President Trump appointed to the Court of Appeals for lifetime appointments, not one is black? This is what they've been doing. You want to talk about packing a court? Let's have that discussion.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Senator. Let's go on and talk about the issue of racial justice.
I just want the record to reflect she never answered the question. So maybe the next debate, Joe Biden will answer the question, but I think the American people know the answer.
Thank you, Vice President. In March, Breonna Taylor, a 26-year-old emergency room technician in Louisville, was shot and killed after police officers executing a search warrant in a narcotics investigation broke into her apartment. The police said they identified themselves. Taylor's boyfriend said he didn't hear them do that. He used a gun registered to him to fire a shot, which wounded an officer. The officers then fired more than 20 rounds into the apartment. They say they were acting in self-defense. None of them have been indicted in connection with her death. Senator Harris, in the case of Breonna Taylor, was justice done? You have 2 minutes.
I don't believe so. And I've talked with Breonna's mother, Tamika Palmer, and her family. And her family deserves justice. She was a beautiful young woman. She had as her life goal to become a nurse, and she wanted to become an EMT to first learn what's going on out on the street so she could then become a nurse and save lives. And her life was taken unjustifiably and tragically and violently. And it brings me to, you know, the 8 minutes and 46 seconds that America witnessed, during which an American man was tortured and killed under the knee of an armed, uniformed police officer. And people around our country of every race, of every age, of every gender, perfect strangers to each other, marched shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm, fighting for us to finally achieve that ideal of equal justice under law. And I was a part of those peaceful protests. And I believe strongly that, first of all, we are never going to condone violence, but we always must fight for the values that we hold dear, including the fight to achieve our ideals. And that's why Joe Biden and I have said on this subject, look, and I'm a former career prosecutor. I know what I'm talking about. Bad cops are bad for good cops. We need reform of our policing in America and our criminal justice system, which is why Joe and I will immediately ban chokeholds and carotid holds. George Floyd would be alive today if we did that. We will require a national registry for police officers who break the law. We will, on the issue of criminal justice reform, get rid of private prisons and cash bail, and we will decriminalize marijuana, and we will expunge the records of those who have been convicted of marijuana. This is a time for leadership on a tragic, tragic issue of unarmed black people in America who have been killed.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Vice President Pence, let me pose the same question to you. In the case of Breonna Taylor, was justice done? You have 2 minutes, uninterrupted.
Well, our heart breaks for the loss of any innocent American life. And the family of Breonna Taylor has our sympathies. But I trust our justice system, a grand jury that refused the evidence. And it really is remarkable that as a former prosecutor, you would assume that an impaneled grand jury looking at all the evidence got it wrong. But you're entitled to your opinion, Senator. I think, look, and with regard to George Floyd, there's no excuse for what happened to George Floyd. And justice will be served. But there's also no excuse for the rioting and looting that followed. I mean, it really is astonishing. Flora Westbrook is with us here tonight in Salt Lake City. Just a few weeks ago, I stood at what used to be her salon. It was burned to the ground by rioters and looters. And Flora is still trying to put her life back together. And I must tell you, this presumption that you hear consistently from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, that America is systemically racist, and that, as Joe Biden said, that he believes that law enforcement has an implicit bias against minorities, is a great insult to the men and women who serve in law enforcement. And I want everyone to know who puts on the uniform of law enforcement every day that President Trump and I stand with you. And it is remarkable that when Senator Tim Scott tried to pass a police reform bill, brought together a group of Republicans and Democrats, Senator Harris, you got up and walked out of the room. And then you filibustered Senator Tim Scott's bill on the Senate floor that would have provided new accountability, new resources. Look, we don't have to choose between supporting law enforcement, improving public safety, and supporting our African-American neighbors and all of our minorities. Under President Trump's leadership, we'll always stand with law enforcement, and we'll do what we've done from day one, and that is improve the lives of African Americans.
Thank you, Vice President.
Record unemployment, record investments in education, and we'll fight for school choice for all of our minorities.
Thank you, Vice President.
I'd like to respond.
Senator Harris.
I will not sit here and be lectured by the Vice President on what it means to enforce the laws of our country. I am the only one on this stage who has personally prosecuted everything from child sexual assault to homicide. I'm the only one on this stage who has prosecuted the big banks for taking advantage of America's homeowners. I'm the only one on this stage who prosecuted for-profit colleges for taking advantage of our veterans. And the reality of this is that we are talking about an election in 27 days, where last week the President of the United States took a debate stage in front of 70 million Americans and refused to condemn white supremacists.
Not true.
And
not true.
It wasn't like he didn't have a chance. He didn't do it, and then he doubled down. And then he said, when pressed, stand back, stand by. And this is a part of a pattern of Donald Trump's. He called Mexicans rapists and criminals. He instituted as his first act a Muslim ban. On the issue of Charlottesville, where people were peacefully protesting the need for racial justice, where a young woman was killed. And on the other side, there were neo-Nazis carrying tiki torches, shouting racial epithets, anti-Semitic slurs. And Donald Trump, when asked about it, said there were fine people on both sides. This is who we have as the President of the United States. And America, you deserve better. Joe Biden will be a president who brings our country together.
Senator Harris,
and recognizes the beauty in our diversity and the fact that we all have so much more in common than what separates us.
Vice President Pence, let me give you a minute to respond.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate that very much. You know, I think this is one of the things that makes people dislike the media so much in this country, Susan, is that you selectively edit, just like Senator Harris did, comments that President Trump and I and others on our side of the aisle make. I mean, Senator Harris conveniently omitted, after the president made comments about people on either side of the debate over monuments, he condemned the KKK, neo-Nazis, and white supremacists, and has done so repeatedly. You're concerned that he doesn't condemn neo-Nazis. President Trump has Jewish grandchildren. His daughter and son-in-law are Jewish. This is a president who respects and cherishes all of the American people. But you talk about having personally prosecuted. I'm glad you brought up your record, Senator.
Thank you.
But I really need to make this point. When you were DA in San Francisco, when you left office, African Americans were 19 times more likely to be prosecuted for minor drug offenses than whites and Hispanics. When you were Attorney General of California, you increased the disproportionate incarceration of blacks in California. You did nothing on criminal justice reform in California. You didn't lift a finger to pass the First Step Act on Capitol Hill. I mean, the reality is your record speaks for itself. President Trump and I have fought for criminal justice reform.
Thank you, Vice President
We fought for
Pence.
educational choice and opportunities for African Americans, all of our
Thank you,
minorities.
sir.
And we'll do it for 4 more
Thank you.
years.
You know, there is no more important issue than the final issue that we're going to talk about tonight, and that is the issue of the election
But
itself.
Susan, he attacked my record. I would like an opportunity to respond.
Let me give you 30 seconds because we're running out of time.
I appreciate that. First of all, having served as the Attorney General of the state of California, the work that I did is a model of what our nation needs to do, and we will be able to do under a Joe Biden presidency. Our agenda includes what this administration has failed to do. It will be about not only instituting a ban on chokeholds and carotid holes.
Thank you.
Not only.
Thank you, Senator
I
Harris.
would like to go through.
These are points that you made earlier in the hour, and I want to talk about the election itself before we have to.
But I want to talk about the connection between what Joe and I will do and my record, which includes I was the first statewide officer to institute a requirement that my agents would wear body cameras and keep them on full time. We were the first to initiate a requirement that there would be a training for law enforcement on implicit bias because, yes, Joe Biden and I recognize that implicit bias does exist, Mr. Vice President, contrary to what you may believe. We did the work of instituting reforms that were about investing in reentry. This is the work that we have done and the work we will do going forward. And again, I will not be lectured by the Vice President on our record of what we have done in terms of law enforcement and keeping our communities safe and a commitment to reforming the criminal justice system of America.
Thank you, Senator Harris. And I'd like to pose I'd like you to respond first to the question on our final topic, the election itself. President Trump has several times refused to commit himself to a peaceful transfer of power after the election. If your ticket wins and President Trump refuses to accept a peaceful transfer of power, what steps would you and Vice President Biden then take? What would happen next? You have 2 minutes.
So I'll tell you, Joe and I are, I think, particularly proud of the coalition that we've built around our campaign. We probably have one of the broadest coalitions of folks that you've ever seen in a presidential race. Of course, we have the support of Democrats, but also independents and Republicans. In fact, 7 members of President George W. Bush's cabinet are supporting our ticket. We have the support of Colin Powell, Cindy McCain, John Kasich, over 500 generals, retired generals, and former national security experts and advisors are supporting our campaign. And I believe they are doing that because they know that Joe Biden has a deep, deep-seated commitment to fight for our democracy and to fight for the integrity of our democracy and to bring integrity back to the White House. And so we believe in the American people. We believe in our democracy. And here's what I'd like to say to everybody. Vote. Please vote. Vote early. Come up with a plan to vote. Go to iwillvote.com. You can also go to joebiden.com. We have it within our power in these next 27 days to make the decision about what will be the course of our country for the next 4 years. And it is within our power, and if we use our vote and we use our voice, we will win. And we will not let anyone subvert our democracy with what Donald Trump has been doing, as he did on the debate stage last week, when again in front of 70 million people, he openly attempted to suppress the vote. Joe Biden, on the other hand, on that same debate stage, because clearly Donald Trump doesn't think he can run on a record because it's a failed record, Joe Biden on that stage said, hey, just please vote. So I'll repeat what Joe said. Please vote.
Thank you, Senator. Vice President Pence, President Trump has several times refused to commit himself to a peaceful transfer of power after the election. If Vice President Biden is declared the winner and President Trump refuses to accept a peaceful transfer of power, what would be your role and responsibility as Vice President? What would you personally do? You have 2 minutes.
Well, Susan, first and foremost, I think we're going to win this election. Because while Joe Biden and Kamala Harris rattle off a long litany of the establishment in Washington, D.C., an establishment that Joe Biden's been a part of for 47 years, President Donald Trump has launched a movement of everyday Americans from every walk of life. And I have every confidence that those same Americans that delivered that historic victory in 2016, they see this president's record where we rebuild our military, we revived our economy through tax cuts and rolling back regulation, fighting for fair trade, unleashing American energy. We appointed conservatives to our federal courts at every level. And we stood with the men and women of law enforcement every single day. And I think that movement of Americans has only grown stronger in the last 4 years. But when you talk about accepting the outcome of the election, I must tell you, Senator, your party has spent the last 3.5 years trying to overturn the results of the last election. It's amazing. When Joe Biden was vice president of the United States, the FBI actually spied on President Trump and my campaign. I mean, there were documents released this week that the CIA actually made a referral to the FBI documenting that those allegations were coming from the Hillary Clinton campaign. And of course, we've all seen the avalanche, what you put the country through for the better part of 3 years until it was found that there was no obstruction, no collusion, case closed. And then, Senator Harris, you and your colleagues in the Congress tried to impeach the President of the United States over a phone call. And now Hillary Clinton has actually said to Joe Biden that in her words, under no circumstances should he concede the election. So let me just say, I think we're going to win this election. President Trump and I are fighting every day in courthouses to prevent Joe Biden and Kamala Harris from changing the rules and creating this universal mail-in voting that will create a massive opportunity for voter fraud. And we have a free and fair election. We know we're going to have confidence in it. And I believe in all my heart that President Donald Trump's going to be reelected for 4 more years.
You know, I've written all the questions that I've asked tonight, but for the final question of the debate, I'd like to read a question that someone else wrote. The Utah Debate Commission asked students in the state to write essays about what they would like to ask you. And I want to close tonight's debate with the question posed by Brecklin Brown. She's an 8th grader at Springville Junior High in Springville, Utah. And here's what she wrote, quote, "When I watch the news, all I see is arguing between Democrats and Republicans. When I watch the news, all I see is citizen fighting against citizen. When I watch the news, all I see are 2 candidates from opposing parties trying to tear each other down. If our leaders can't get along, how are the citizens supposed to get along?" And then she added, "Your examples could make all the difference to bring us together," end quote. So to each of you in turn, I'd like you to take 1 minute and respond to Brecklin. Vice President Pence, you have 1 minute.
Brecklin, it's a wonderful question. And let me just commend you for taking an interest in public life. I started following the news when I was very young. And in America, we believe in a free and open exchange of debate. And we celebrate that. And it's how we've created literally the freest and most prosperous nation in the history of the world. But I would tell you that don't assume that what you're seeing on your local news networks is synonymous with the American people. You know, I look at the relationship between Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the late justice who we just lost from the Supreme Court, and the late Justice Antonin Scalia. They were on polar opposites on the Supreme Court of the United States, one very liberal, one very conservative. But what's been learned since her passing was the 2 of them and their families were the very closest of friends. I mean, here in America, we can disagree. We can debate vigorously, as Senator Harris and I have on this stage tonight. But when the debate is over, we come together as Americans. And that's what people do in big cities and small towns all across this country. So I just want to encourage you, Brecklin. I want to tell you that we're going to work every day to have government as good as our people. And the American people each and every day love a good debate. We love a good argument. But we always come together and are always there for one another.
Thank you,
in times of need. And we've especially learned that through the difficulties of this year.
Senator Harris, what would you say to Brecklin?
First of all, I love hearing from our young leaders. And when I hear her words, when I hear your words, Brecklin, I know our future is bright because it is that perspective on who we are and who we should be. that is a sign of leadership and is something we should all aspire to be. And that, that brings me to Joe. Joe Biden, one of the reasons that Joe decided to run for president is after Charlottesville, which we talked about earlier. It so troubled him and upset him, like it did all of us, that there was that kind of hate and division. What propelled Joe to run for president was to see that over the course of the last 4 years, what Brecklin described has been happening. Joe has a long-standing reputation of working across the aisle and working in a bipartisan way. And that's what he's going to do as president. Joe Biden has a history of lifting people up and fighting for their dignity. You have to know Joe's story to know that Joe has known pain, he has known suffering, and he has known love. And so, Brecklin, when you think about the future, I do believe the future is bright. And it will be because of your leadership, and it will be because we fight for each person's voice through their vote, and we get engaged in this election because you have the ability through your work and through, eventually, your vote.
Thank you,
to
Senator
determine
Harris.
the future of our country and what its leadership looks like.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Thank you, Vice President Pence. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. We want to thank also the University of Utah for its hospitality, and most of all, our thanks to all the Americans who watched this debate tonight. Again, our best wishes for a quick recovery to President Trump, the First Lady, and everyone who is battling COVID-19. The second presidential debate is next week on October 15th, a town hall-style debate in Miami. We hope you'll join us then. Good evening.
And that concludes this vice presidential debate, the only one of this election season. I'm Judy Woodruff at the NewsHour studio in Washington. We've watched Kamala Harris, the Democrat, debating Vice President Mike Pence, their spouses coming on stage in this very socially distanced experience. We see Douglas Emhoff, who's the husband of Kamala Harris, wearing a mask. This is the only vice presidential debate. There are still 2 more presidential debates that are scheduled. Only a handful of people in the audience, as you can see, behind moderator Susan Page. This was a debate with, I would say, several instances where the candidates went beyond the time they were supposed to go. But it was a much more civil debate than what we saw last week when the president and Joe Biden faced off. They covered the pandemic, COVID, they covered the economy, climate change, China, the Supreme Court, and there at the end, accepting the results of the election and a question from an 8th grade student asking why Democrats and Republicans and people in public life can't get along, and why is there so much arguing. But for right now, let's go to our correspondents following these campaigns. Yamiche Alcindor and Lisa Desjardins are both back with me. So, Yamiche, you've been following the Trump-Pence effort very closely. What did you hear tonight?
Well, while this debate was very civil, Vice President Pence was really interrupting Senator Harris to make point after point about the fact that he believes the Trump administration is the best administration to go forward. He defended vigorously the president's status and his response to the coronavirus. He said at one point that there was not an office that was supposed to be dealing with pandemics dissolved. That's not true. There was an office in the NSC, the National Security Council, that was dissolved. We also saw the vice president talk about race, and he said at one point that looting and rioting was no excuse for the death of George Floyd, when in fact there have, of course, been some looting, but there also have been peaceful protests. He also defended the president and said that he had never talked about and never said that he would not condemn white supremacists. The president did do that, but the vice president also said that he respects all the Americans and that his Jewish grandchildren give him a connection to race. I also want to put up a graphic for people, specifically on the issue of climate change. If we put that up, Scientific consensus is that climate change is real and human-caused. Air pollution has increased 22% from 2014 to 2017, and climate change is causing stronger hurricanes worldwide. We put that graphic up because at one point, Vice President Pence said, yes, the climate is changing, but we're not sure why. Science shows that humans are definitely impacting the climate. So then again, you saw the Vice President at times giving misleading information, but he did it in a much less brash way than the President.
So, Lisa, again, you've been following the Biden-Harris campaign closely. What struck you tonight?
Well, you know, when you look at the Harris kind of performance tonight, she obviously was trying to be more warm, at the same time giving a very similar response to Joe Biden to things that the vice president was saying that she felt were lies or inaccurate, kind of that give me a break smile and shaking of her head. But there were some things that Harris said that we felt needed some context as well. First, about pre-existing conditions, a very important issue for many Americans. Let's look at a graphic. Harris said that the Trump-Pence campaign is coming for you if you have a pre-existing condition. Here's what we know about President Trump's view on that. He put out an executive order in September in which he said he has a commitment to protecting people who have pre-existing conditions. Now, it was only a commitment. At the same time, the president is suing to overturn and end the Affordable Care Act, which provides insurance to many Americans who wouldn't get it otherwise. Now, he has not come up with a plan for replacing Obamacare. And Judy, what that means in the end is that while the president has expressed a strong commitment to protect pre-existing conditions, he has not said how he would do it. Ending Obamacare would certainly make people with pre-existing conditions more vulnerable in the insurance market, and there are an estimated 20 million of them. One other thing, on the coronavirus itself, moderator Susan Page asked the vice president why America has such larger rates of coronavirus than other industrialized nations. We wanted to show you in context what that looks like. This is a graphic of the daily rates of deaths reported in industrialized nations. You see that line at the top? That is the United States, the purple line leading all other industrialized nations. But one other interesting point about that is that when you look at the rate of coronavirus deaths by population, the U.S. is still among the leaders in the world, but there are two other industrialized nations ahead of it, Spain and Brazil. But we still are way in front for most of the rest of the world.
And thank you for that, Lisa. And I want to quickly come back to you, Yamiche, because it seemed that when the vice president was asked about this administration's record on COVID, the fact that the U.S. has had many more deaths proportionately by population than other countries, I didn't hear an answer. What did you hear?
There wasn't a clear answer. In fact, what the vice president did was really continue to say, well, the president did the best that he could, that at one point he banned travel from China. He essentially kept, in some ways, repeating the talking points that we've heard from this administration. He didn't really say, in particular, we could have done some things better. The president at times did downplay the virus. Instead, he really didn't want to go there. What he did was really put on a good face and put on the idea that the Trump